Hey guys, tonight we are going to wander somewhere so hushed you can hear the air change when you cross the threshold of a place tucked into the folds of Edo Japan, where the city's clamor fades into the clink of ceramic, the soft scrape of bamboo on iron, and the sort of pauses that feel heavier than words. Picture narrow streets under a moon, too shy to be bright. Paper lanterns swinging in a breeze that smells faintly of pine and roasted tea. The wooden facades along these lanes lean in as if they're conspiring to hide what's at the end. You're headed for a samurai tea house, not the showy kind, but the kind where the most important noise is the kettle's sigh. And yes, you probably won't survive this in modern terms. Someone would text you within 5 minutes, and that's a crime here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The street beneath your feet is uneven, its stones polished by centuries of Geta sandals and quiet anticipation. A thin mist has settled low, curling around your ankles like a cat that knows the way. You walk past a shop, shuttered for the night, its signboard creaking faintly on a single cord. Somewhere behind you, a merchant's cart rattles over a bridge, and the sound fades almost immediately into the quilt of silence that covers this district after dark. Historians still argue whether these narrow streets and tea house quarters were intentionally kept dim to signal privacy or simply because Edo's fire-conscious building codes discouraged too many open flames. Either way, the effect is the same. You walk as though you've entered a dream, guided more by shadow than sight. Up ahead, a lantern sways on a wooden post, its paper sides painted with a calligraphy crest you can't read, but somehow recognize as a kind of welcome. The light from it isn't strong yet, barely reaches the ground, but it's enough to catch the edge of a Norrin curtain across a doorway just beyond. The fabric stirs slightly, though there's no wind you can feel. Mainstream fact: tea houses like this during the Edo period weren't just for drinking tea. They were spaces for carefully staged encounters, diplomacy in whispers, and performances of cultural refinement. Samurai might come here not to plan battles, but to negotiate alliances through the shared stillness of Jinoyu, the tea ceremony. The silence was a language in itself. The closer you get, the more you notice the quiet. It's not the emptiness of an abandoned street. It's the presence of something waiting for you to match its pace. Your footsteps slow without your consent. You adjust your breathing. The chatter of the city vendors, horses, street performers has receded so completely, it's like someone turned down the volume on life. Quirky tidbit: in some districts, tea houses employed silence ushers, staff stationed discreetly outside to subtly discourage loud passers-by, sometimes by offering them a sweet or guiding them to a livelier street. Whether that's truth or lore, you're aware now of how even your breathing feels too loud for this moment. A guardstone marks the edge of the tea house entrance. You pause here not from hesitation, but from the unspoken custom of crossing thresholds deliberately. The Norrin curtain hangs ahead, its dark indigo, dyed so deep it swallows the lantern light, save for the bold white brushstrokes of its emblem. The fabric is heavy, and you can tell that pushing through will carry you into a different air altogether. You hear it before you move, the faintest shish of water in an iron kettle somewhere inside, the sound like a distant spring filtered through a dream. There's also the woody aroma of tatami mats, even from here grass and dust and something older, something that has soaked into the fibers over decades of footsteps and ceremonies. Historians still argue whether Edo tea houses for samurai developed their own subcode of etiquette distinct from the broader tea ceremony traditions of Sen no Riki's lineage. The records are tantalizingly vague. Scribes weren't always welcome in spaces where gestures carried more meaning than documents. You place your palm gently against the norin and push, feeling the cloth give way, brushing your cheek as you step forward. The outside world closes behind you in that motion. The mist, the stones, the creak of the signboard, all sealed away by a rectangle of fabric. Inside, the entryway is low, lit, and spare. A single candle sits in a ceramic cup on a wooden shelf. To your left, its flame steady, no draft here to disturb it. The light skims across a narrow strip of polished wood where guests remove their footwear. A silent figure in subdued kimono stands beyond, hands folded, head inclined just enough to acknowledge your arrival without breaking the stillness. The air is warm. It's touched by the soft humidity of hot water nearby. You catch a note of roasted rice tea from somewhere deeper in the building, layered under the sharper scent of freshly cleaned tatami. Your eyes adjust slowly, the dimness pulling the edges of the space into a kind of soft blur. You step forward, aware of the weight of your own presence. Every movement here matters. Every shift of your body is part of the conversation, even if no words pass. You've just crossed into the tea house proper, and you can feel the history pressing in, not like a burden, but like the gentle hand of a teacher on your shoulder, guiding you toward a lesson you didn't know you needed. The norin settles behind you with a soft sigh, and the outside world is good in its sounds, its movement, even its cold air. The stillness in here is not the same as in empty rooms. It's a deliberate construction, built as carefully as the beams and joints of the walls themselves. A low step rises before Yukutsu no Jisi, the stone or wooden platform where you kneel to remove your footwear. It's not an afterthought. This small transition space is as much a part of the tea house as the ceremony itself. In Edo, Japan, to enter without removing your sandals would have been unthinkable. It's a breach so crude it could derail the whole purpose of the gathering. You kneel, resting your hands briefly on the polished edge of the step, and begin to untie the laces of your straw waraji. The attendant remains still, watching not as a guard, but as a guide, ready to step in should your modern fingers fumble the knots. When the sandals come free, you turn them neatly to face the door you entered through, ready for your departure, even though that's hours away. Mainstream fact: this arrangement of footwear saws toward the door. Toes toward the owner was standard in Edo etiquette and remains so in Japanese tradition today. It wasn't just about neatness. It was about creating a physical and mental readiness for leaving. A reminder that all visits are temporary. Your socks meet the warm smoothness of the polished wood floor, and the change in temperature is immediate. The air near the floor carries the faint scent of tatami mats, sun-dried rush grass with an undercurrent of earth. Clean but not sterile. The attendant steps forward, inclining his head again, and gestures with an open palm toward a narrow corridor. You follow your footsteps, muffled by the layered weave beneath. The corridor bends slightly, an intentional design called roji in garden paths, used here indoors to keep you from seeing the tea room all at once. The turn slows you, draws your attention to the textures around you. The paper grain of the shoji screens, the slight creak of wood under shifting weight. The sound of water that now seems a little louder, though it's coming closer. Historians still argue, but the tea houses in samurai districts were constructed with subtly tighter corridors to enforce a kind of humility, requiring guests to bow or turn their bodies to pass through. The records on construction measurements are maddeningly vague, but walking here, you can see how it works. You've unconsciously lowered your head, and your stride has shortened without you telling it to at the corridor's end. You find another low step, this one leading up into the tea room itself. Here, the ceiling lowers slightly, a spatial cue for you to bow as you pass beneath it. The gesture isn't forced. The room is simply built in such a way that it feels right. You place your palm briefly against the cool wood of the threshold before stepping inside. Quirky tidbit. Some Edo tea houses intentionally varied the floor height between spaces by a single tatami mat's thickness. Not enough to trip you, enough to subtly shift your awareness of your own body. The idea was to keep you present, tuned in to every movement, every surface. Inside, the tatami mats stretch wall to wall in a grid so precise it could have been measured with the moon's shadow. The mats are pale gold under the low light. Their woven edges bound with dark cloth in patterns so subtle you can only see them when the candle flickers. To your right, the tokonoma alcove waits its hanging scroll, a pale vertical of ink strokes, K, and beneath it, a single flower arranged in a bamboo vase. You don't study it yet. There's an order to things here. The host is already kneeling at the far end, head bowed low in greeting. You mirror the bow from where you are, your hands pressing into the mat, fingertips registering its give. The distance between you is both physical and ceremonial. You won't close it until invited. Mainstream fact, informal Edo tea ceremonies. Even the initial greeting followed a strict choreography, timed pauses between bows, precise angles of the head, and an avoidance of direct eye contact until the right moment. Every piece of it was meant to level the field between host and guest. Least within the walls of the tea house, you exhaled slowly, feeling the way the room shapes the air around you. The faintest hum of the iron kettle reaches your ears, now less like boiling water, more like the low murmur of wind in pine branches. Somewhere beyond the shoji, a night insect calls once, then falls silent, as if it too is waiting for what happens next. Asterisk, you stay kneeling just inside the room, the tatami cool beneath your knees as the air folds in around you. The attendant has disappeared as silently as he arrived, leaving only you and the host in the chamber. There's no rush to move forward. The pause itself is part of the arrivalist space for you to let the clamor of the city and the clatter of sandals fade from your muscles before you can sit in your final place. There's one more threshold of manners to cross, the removal and placement of your footwear's memory, even without the sandals. Now, you mirror the same precision in arranging yourself, smoothing the folds of your clothing so nothing appears careless. The stillness sharpens your heartbeat, sounds louder than the kettle. The host shifts slightly, a rustle of kimono fabric, and gestures for you to approach the tatami area where the gathering will unfold. You shuffle forward on your knees, moving. And shiko, the formal knee walking that prevents you from rising above the host's seated height. It's a movement that reminds you immediately of how unnatural speed feels here. Mainstream fact, in the Edo period tea ceremony, guests were trained in shiko to preserve a low, respectful profile during formal movements across the tea room. The act wasn't just etiquette, it preserved the unbroken visual harmony of the gathering, ensuring no sudden vertical lines interrupted the horizontal flow of bodies, bowls, and mats. Halfway to your spot, you pause. To your right, the getabako, a small cabinet for storing sandals, sits unobtrusively in the shadows. Its cedar panels are plain, but the grain of the wood catches a warm glow from a nearby candle, revealing knots like the swirls of old water eddies. For a moment, you think of the streets outside, cold stones underfoot, smell of mist, and realize they've already receded into memory. You reach your place of flat cushion near one corner and kneel with your back straight, the palms resting lightly on your thighs. The cushion's cotton is firm, holding its shape as if it's been waiting just for this moment. The host acknowledges you with a faint incline of the head, then turns their attention to a low, square hearth set into the tatami before them. The iron kettle above it issues a thin wisp of steam, curling upward like a signal you can't read. Historians still argue whether samurai tea gatherings in Edo were truly silent in the strict sense, or whether muted conversation was permitted between formal steps. Diaries of the time hint at both, some describing hours without a word, others recalling quiet talk about poetry or politics over the first ball. What's certain is that even talk, when it happened, had to match the room's slow pulse. You adjust your posture slightly, and in the motion, you catch the faint scent of burning charcoal. It's clean, almost sweet, nothing like the heavy smoke of a kitchen fire. The brazier's heat is gentle, enough to warm the space between you and the host without pulling your focus from the moment. Quirky tidbit: some tea houses in samurai districts use specific blends of charcoal and incense hidden in the brazier to create a signature scent for their gatherings. Guests would recognize the host's signature before even seeing them. The host shifts again, this time reaching for a folded cloth resting beside the kettle. Fukusa, a square of silk the color of autumn maple leaves. With slow, practiced movements, they begin to fold and refold it, each crease crisp and deliberate. It's not idleness, it's part of the purification ritual. And even the folds have their own history. It's passed down through generations. You realize that you haven't heard a single sound from outside since you entered. No carts, no voices, not even the distant murmur of the Sumida River. The room seems to have absorbed the world beyond, leaving only the breath of steam from the kettle and the quiet rasp of silk sliding against itself. Joke 1 murmured inwardly to yourself, if my phone were here, it would have exploded from sheer neglect by now. You lower your gaze to the tatami, following the grid of seams between the mats. Each line leads somewhere at the hearth, the alcove, the host's knees. It's a reminder that in this room, even the floor is part of the conversation, guiding eyes and bodies in silent choreography. When the folding of the fukusa ends, the cloth is set aside with exacting care, and the host's hands return to stillness. Nothing here ever drops into absence of space. Between actions is filled with the weight of what came before and the promise of what comes next. You let your shoulders drop, not from fatigue, but from acceptance. The tea house has pulled you into its rhythm, and you no longer feel the urge to fill the silence with anything at all. Your knees remain planted on the tatami as the host turns, ever so slightly, to reach for the implements arranged before them. They are laid out with the precision of a calligraphy stroke keych tool, angled in relation to the others, so that nothing feels accidental. The bamboo ladle rests across the rim of the iron kettle, its pale arc glowing faintly against the dark metal. Beside it, a lidded tea caddy sits like a quiet promise, its lacquer surface catching just enough candlelight to reveal faint gold flecks embedded in the finish. You're careful not to let your gaze linger too greedily. There's a rhythm here, and looking too soon can feel like speaking out of turn. Instead, you shift your attention outward to the edges of the room. The walls aligned in washi paper panels framed by warm cedar, their surfaces subtly uneven from the fibers pressed into them centuries ago. The irregular texture catches the dim light in a way that makes each panel look alive, breathing. Even the air smells faintly of agusa, rushed from the tatami, and something more delicate. The stem of the single flower in the alcove, you haven't examined it yet, waits there like a word you're not supposed to read until the right point in the conversation. Mainstream fact: in Edo period tea houses, the tokonoma alcove was always arranged to reflect the season and the theme of the gathering. For samurai, the choice could be symbolic of a certain flower, or a scroll phrase might signal the tone of negotiations or the mood the host hoped to set. The host adjusts their posture, and the sleeve of their kimono slides away, just enough to reveal a forearms tensed with deliberate stillness. They extend their right hand toward the tea caddy, and, with 3 slow breaths worth of motion, draw it toward the center of the tatami in front of them. The sound it makes against the mat is almost imperceptible, like the sigh of fabric brushing. Fabric. Historians still argue whether the placement of tea implements in samurai gatherings contained subtle messages understood only by the initiated. Some suggest that shifting a caddy by even half a mat width could change the implied hierarchy of the meeting. Others believe the positioning was purely aesthetic. You find yourself leaning slightly forward, not from impatience, but from the way the moment seems to pull you in. The host lifts the bamboo ladle, hishaku, from its resting place, the curved bowl casting a crescent shadow over the kettle. When it dips into the steaming water, the faint she sounded makes could just as easily be whined through pine needles, or rain beginning to fall on a still pond. Quirky tidbit: some tea masters in Edo were rumored to train their apprentices to pour water at slightly different angles depending on the guest's status, changing the tone of the splash as a subtle cue. Whether true or not, the very idea says a lot about the sensitivity of sound in this space. The ladle hovers briefly, steam ghosting upward in slow swirls. The host returns it to rest, then reaches for a silk cloth folded neatly nearbeneath the chakin, used for wiping a tea bowl before use. They handle it with such precision it feels almost like the cloth is an extension of their own skin. Every fold opens smoothly, without a single wasted motion. And then the rim of the tea bowl receives a careful circular touch. The bowl itself is irregular wider at one edge, with a glaze that shifts from deep river green to earthy brown, as if someone had captured the meeting of water and soil in ceramic form. A faint spiral mark in the center suggests the potter's wheel, but it's not perfect. Perfection would be too loud for this room. You catch yourself staring. Your mind offers a right thought. Joke one. Imagine drinking your morning instant coffee from this. It would feel like a felony. When the wiping is done, the chakin folds back into itself like a bird tucking in its wings. It's set aside, and for a heartbeat, the host sits motionless again. That pause between the clearing of the bowl and the arrival of the tea feels like holding your breath before the first note of a song. The kettle exhales another soft hiss. Hear it more clearly now, as though the room has shifted its attention to the sound. You realize the silence here isn't the absence of noises, the careful placement of it. Like brushstrokes on an empty scroll, the host's hands hover briefly over the tea caddy, then rest their fingertips grazing lacquer. You sense the next part coming, but no one rushes. Here, beginnings arrive like the tide, so slow you don't notice until you're already standing in the water. Asterisk, the host's fingertips linger on the lacquered caddy for a heartbeat, as though feeling the weight and balance before lifting it. When it does rise, it's in one smooth arc, no jerks, no hesitation, just a slow transfer of presence from tatami to hands. The caddy is placed slightly closer to the tea bowl, aligned with invisible lines only the host seems to see. You notice how every movement here leaves a wake, like a boat on still water. The air feels altered after each action, as though it holds onto the gesture a little before letting it dissolve. The host reaches for the chishaku, the bamboo tea scoop, impossibly light in appearance, curved just enough to suggest the idea of a crescent moon. The pale surface is polished smooth from years of use, though a faint grain still runs along its length, reminding you it was once part of a living stalk swaying somewhere in the wind. Mainstream fact: in Edo-era tea gatherings, a host might use a particular chishaku passed down through generations, with each bend and polish preserving the memory of every ceremony it served in. These scoops often had names, poetic ones, referencing landscapes, seasons, or even famous poems. The host slides the chishaku into the caddy and withdraws it with a tiny mound of matcha balanced on the tip. The green is shockingly vivid against the warm light, like powdered jade, like crushed spring leaves caught mid-bloom. Can almost smell its grassy sharpness even from where you sit. The mound tips into the tea bowl, making no sound at all. The host sets the scoop down across the rim of the caddy. And for a moment, you just watch the green powder sit there, a small hill waiting for rain. Historians still argue whether samurai tea houses favored a slightly different grade of matcha than the common merchants or aristocrats. Some claim they used a more robust, less delicate blend, matching the warrior's cultivated image of austerity. Others suggest they chose the most refined powder available, to demonstrate discernment and status. The host repeats the scoop, letting another measure fall into the bowl, the green deepening. There's something hypnotic about it, the way the motion begins and ends in such precise arcs. No flicks, no accidental clumps. Quirky tidbit. Some Edo tea masters trained to measure matcha without looking directly at the scoop, relying on muscle memory to keep each serving identical. Supposedly, this blind scoop impressed guests as much as the flavor itself. The kettle exhales, a soft, steady hiss. The host lifts the hishikutha, bamboo ladle, and dips it into the kettle's mouth. Water slips in with a sound so delicate. It could be silk unraveling. A thin stream pours into the bowl, meeting the green powder with a hiss like the first rain on a summer street. The matcha darkens, releasing a fragrance that seems to fill the whole room. The host sets the ladle back on the kettle and reaches for the bamboo whisk. Its bristles are fine and pale, fanning out in perfect symmetry. Without haste, the host lowers it into the bowl, the tips brushing the surface of the water. The first strokes are slow, almost lazy, folding the water into the powder. Then, gradually, the motion quickens, the whisk's bristles blurring into a pale halo. Faint froth forms, growing thicker with each pass until the surface is a soft, clouded green. You realize you've been holding your breath again? The rhythm of the whisk pulling you into its own metrome. Joke 1. If my milk frother made this sound, I'd treat it like royalty. The whisk slows, lifts, and taps lightly against the rim of the bowl 3 times, each a small punctuation mark in the air. The froth settles slightly, revealing the smooth, glossy texture beneath. The host sets the whisk aside. The bowl is ready. The matcha seems to glow in the dim light. Its surface so smooth, you could imagine a tiny reflection of yourself looking back. You know the next part is yours, but you wait, because here, the invitation isn't spoken, it's given in the way the host's hands release the bowl toward you, palms up as though offering a small green planet. The bowl rests now between you and the host, its weight transferred from their hands to the tatami with deliberate care. For a long breath, no one moves. You feel the faint steam rising toward your face, the grassy scent mingling with the subtle char of the brazier's charcoal. The warmth from the ceramic seems to radiate into the space between your palms, though you haven't touched it yet. Finally, you shift forward, lowering your head in acknowledgement. Your fingertips meet the bowl warm, but not searing in. You lift it with both hands, the way you might cradle a living thing. The ceramic's texture is uneven, one side slightly rough where the glaze thins, the other smoother like river stones. Mainstream fact in Edo tea ceremony etiquette. Guests rotated the bowl slightly before drinking, both to admire its craftsmanship and to avoid placing their lips on its most decorated face. This act wasn't just respect for the artisan. It was a subtle nod to humility, ensuring the most beautiful part remained untouched. You turn the bowl clockwise, noticing the way the light catches on its glaze, revealing hairline patterns like faint frost on glass. The green surface of the tea quivers slightly with your movement, holding its froth as though reluctant to lose it. Bringing the bowl to your lips, you take the first sip. The warmth flows across your tongue in a rush of earthiness, faint bitterness, and a vegetal sweetness that blooms in the back of your throat. It's thick without being heavy. It's a froth dissolving into the liquid with a silkiness that feels almost unreal. Historians still argue whether samurai truly enjoyed the taste of matcha or simply endured its intensity for the sake of cultural refinement. Some writings from the era suggest a genuine appreciation. Others imply the flavor was considered secondary to the ceremony's discipline. You take another sip, slower this time, letting the liquid roll over your tongue before swallowing. A faint aftertaste lingers, grassy, almost floral, and it feels like it settles not just in your mouth, but in your chest. Quirky tidbit: certain Edo tea masters claimed they could identify the origin of a matcha harvest by taste alone. Much like wine sommeliers today, a few even hosted blind tasting gatherings. Though these were rare and often outside the strictly formal samurai settings taught as you drink, you're aware of the bowl's slight asymmetry pressing against your lower lip. It's oddly comforting, like the reminder that nothing here aims for machine-perfect symmetry. Everything has a deliberate human hand in it. When the last sip is taken, a small residue of froth clings to the inner wall. You lower the bowl, rotate it back so the decorated face returns to its original position, and place it gently on the tatami in front of you. You bow lightly toward the host, who returns the gesture without words. The bowl remains between you for a moment longer before the host reaches forward, lifts it, and sets it aside with the same precision as every other movement tonight. Joke 1. If I tried to put this bowl down at home, my cat would knock it over in 3 seconds. The kettle hums again, as though pleased with its work, and a faint draft from somewhere makes the candle's flame lean briefly before straightening. Outside, a single night bird calls, the sound cutting through the stillness and vanishing almost instantly. The host's hands rest briefly on their knees, fingers curved loosely. The pause here is different. It feels like the closing of a chapter, the exhale after a completed gesture. You let your own shoulders drop in unison, your breath sinking with the slowing rhythm of the space. No one announces it, but you know the first act of the gathering is over. And just as the tea's warmth settles deeper into your body, the host turns slightly toward the alcove, as if to invite your attention there for the first time tonight. Asterisk, your gaze shifts toward the alcove takanuma, where the room's heart quietly resides. Until now, it's been on the edge of your awareness, a composition of shadow, wood, and a single arrangement waiting to be read. In the dim glow, the hanging scroll is the first thing your eyes find. Bold strokes of ink across pale paper, each brush mark tapering into silence. The calligraphy feels alive, as if the bristles that made it are still suspended midair somewhere in the room. You can't read it outright. It's in a flowing social script, cursive style that even literate Edo townsfolk might puzzle over without guidance. The host notices your gaze and inclines their head slightly, granting silent permission for you to study it. Mainstream fact in Edo period tea gatherings: the scroll in the tokonoma was often chosen days in advance to match the season, the occasion, or the status of the guests. Samurai hosts, in particular, favored phrases drawn from Zen teachings or classical poetry, intended to nudge conversation or contemplation toward certain themes. The brushwork here reads like a breath drawn and released in 3 movements. Even if you can't decipher the exact phrase, you feel the energy in the strokes. The first, strong and deliberate. The second, more fluid. The third, fading into a trailing whisper. It's less like looking at writing and more like witnessing. A moment caught in amber. Beneath the scroll stands a simple bamboo vase, its surface dulled with age. It holds a single camellia, its petals a muted winter white, the kind that seems to gather light rather than reflect it. A sprig of pine leans slightly behind it, the needles catching the faintest glint from the candle. The combination is spare, but deliberate: life, endurance, and quiet elegance in one small gesture. Historians still argue whether these arrangements were purely aesthetic or carried layered meanings, understood only by trained eyes. Some believe a pine branch might signify steadfast loyalty in a time of political uncertainty. A camellia could hint at the fleeting nature of life, a subtle reminder to value the moment. The host remains still, letting you take in the display. Your eyes follow the grain of the wooden alcove shelf, its knots arranged like islands on a pale sea. The faint scent of the flower reaches you barely there. More suggestion than perfuming, somehow sharper against the charcoal warmth in the air. Quirky tidbit. Some tea masters in Edo kept tiny drawers hidden within the tokonoma's woodwork, storing rare incense or small charms to be revealed only to favorite guests. These secret compartments were never acknowledged outright, becoming part of the tea house's quiet mystique. The longer you look, the more the alcove feels like a mirror. For the whole gathering, nothing here shouts for attention, yet everything is perfectly in place. It's a kind of quiet you can't fake. It has to be grown, like moss, over time. Joke 1. If I tried this minimalist look at home, a bookshelf of unread novels would ruin the effect instantly. The host shifts slightly, sleeves brushing the tatami, and your attention returns to the center of the room. The alcove remains in your peripheral vision, now like a soft echo of meaning. You realize that while the tea itself was the centerpiece of the earlier moment, the tokonoma holds the afterimage, the part of the gathering that lingers in thought long after the last sip. The kettle hums again, as if reminding everyone that its work is far from done. Host's hands move toward the utensils once more, and you sense the evening's rhythm drawing you forward to the next act. 1. My now. You're eager to follow without question. The host leans subtly toward the kettle, their posture unbroken in its fluidity, and extends one hand toward the hishaku. The ladle's long handle gleams faintly in the candlelight, a pale arc bridging you to the slow breath of steam rising from the kettle's open mouth. Without a word, the host lifts it, wrist steady, and dips the bowl into the water's surface. The sound is a delicate she, like a brush dragging across wet paper. You watch as the water pours not into the tea bowl this time, but into a smaller rinse bowl set beside it. The motion is unhurried, the stream thin and exact, each droplet landing with a softness that feels measured. Mainstream fact in Edo period tea gatherings. The water temperature was a closely guarded element of the host's technique. Too hot, and the matcha would scorch, losing its delicate flavor. Too cool, and the froth would not form properly. Skilled tea masters could gauge temperature purely by sound and sight, without ever touching the liquid. The host returns the ladle to the kettle's rim and sets the rinse bowl aside. The bamboo whisk from before is lifted once more, its bristles still slightly tinted with the earlier matcha. You expect the same rapid motion as before, but instead, the whisk is rinsed slowly, bristles fanning out under the water like the gills of a jellyfish. Historians still argue whether the whisk's rinsing was purely for cleanliness or also carried a symbolic meaning representing the clearing of the mind before the next preparation. Some suggest it was both, the physical and spiritual inseparable in the ceremony's design. The whisk is set down on its side, bristles resting lightly on the tatami mat for a momentary unconventional pause that seems to belong only to this host style. Then the fukusa appears again, the silk square unfolding in soft, deliberate arcs. The caddy's lid is lifted, its lacquer catching a tiny flicker of flame. Cant set precisely to one side. Quirky tidbit. Some Edo tea masters kept a guest-side fukusa, secondary cloth used exclusively when guests of particularly high status attended, often in colors not seen in everyday gatherings. The rare appearance of such a cloth could be its own subtle compliment. The matcha scoop dips into the caddy again, drawing out a mound of powder that looks almost luminous in this dim room. The mound is placed into the freshly warmed bowl, followed by a second, then a third. The green deepening like a forest under cloud light dot. The ladle dips again, steam curling upward into your face as the water falls into the bowl. The host's hands circle around the whisk, bristles meeting powder and water in quickening strokes. This time, you hear the froth building a faint, muffled sound like someone rubbing satin between their fingers. The foam rises thicker, more consistent than before, until it seems like it could hold its own shape if you tipped the bowl. Joke 1. If cappuccinos were this perfect, every coffee shop in my city would go bankrupt. The whisk lips, tapping gently against the rim of the bowl 3 times. The host sets it down, rotates the bowl slightly toward you, and places it on the tatami. It's close enough for you to lean forward without leaving your seated position. The air between you feels charged, but not with pressure, more like the hum of a string after being plucked. The bowl's rim glistens in the dim light, its contents as smooth as jade under a thin mist. You already know what to do. Bow slightly, accept with both hands, rotate, and sip. This time, the flavor is different, warmer, rounder, with a faint nuttiness beneath the grassy sharpness. It's as though the first bowl was an introduction, and this is the real conversation. The warmth spreads down your throat, blooming in your chest, scent of tatami and pine wrapping around it like a blanket. You place the bowl down with care, the echo of its heat still on your palms. The host bows again, their eyes briefly closing, as though acknowledging something beyond just the exchange of tea. The host lets the moment settle. The second bowl's warmth still lingering in the air between you. Then, without breaking the room's unspoken rhythm, they reach to one side and bring forward a small lacquer tray. Upon it rest 2 delicate confections, each placed on a folded square of white paper. The tray is set down before you, angled with the same quiet exactness you've seen in every movement tonight. One sweet is a soft, rounded shape of pale pink its surface, so smooth it looks almost like sculpted wax. The other is more intricate, a tiny, folded form in deep green, dusted with what looks like a fine powdering of snow. Mainstream fact: in Edo period tea gatherings, these seasonal sweets wagashi were chosen not only for their flavor, but for their role in balancing the bitterness of the matcha. Their design was equally important. Each piece reflected the season, or even the theme, hinted at by the tokonomas, scroll, and flower. The host gestures gently, inviting you to take one. You choose the pink sweet, lifting it with a small wooden pick provided. Its outer layer yields softly as your teeth break through, revealing a smooth, sweet bean paste inside. The sweetness is gentle, almost shy, and it dissolves quickly on your tongue. Historians still argue whether samurai ryo tea masters commissioned wagashi artisans for unique, one-of-a-kind designs to impress particular guests. Some records suggest entire sets of sweets were created for a single evening and never repeated again. The green sweet follows firmer at first bite, with a subtle hint of chestnut mingling with the bean paste. The powdered snow melts instantly, leaving only a faint echo of sweetness before the matcha's memory returns. Quirky tidbit: in some Edo tea houses, the sweets were presented in odd-numbered quantities, 3, 5, or 7 pieces, because odd numbers were thought to feel more harmonious and natural than even ones. The choice was so ingrained that an even count could be seen as a deliberate challenge to tradition. You set the pick down beside the empty paper, the taste lingering like a faint note on a shamisen string. Across from you, the host replaces the lacquer tray, each sweet's absence leaving a quiet space behind. The kettle's hum becomes more noticeable now, like a low, steady drumbeat in the background. It's accompanied by the occasional faint pop from the charcoal in the brazier. It's a sound so subtle you might miss it if you weren't paying attention. A breeze moves through the room, just enough to make the paper panels of the shoji screens flex inward slightly as though the outside world were leaning in for a look. The scent of pine from the garden drifts in, mixing with the tatami's grassy warmth and the faint sweetness still on your tongue. Joke 1. Honestly, if every dessert course came with its own custom room fragrance, I'd never leave. The host's eyes meet yours briefly, their expression unreadable but somehow kind. No words pass, but you understand the cue. The sweets are an interlude, a palate reset, a pause before the ritual continues. You find yourself leaning back slightly, the tatami's firmness under your knees, grounding you in the present moment. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, a cicada calls, its rhythm syncing with the quiet pulse of the kettle. It's the sort of sound that doesn't demand attention, but, once heard, becomes impossible to ignore. The host's hands move toward the utensils again. The silk fukuza, already folded and waiting. The ceremony's next cycle is beginning, and you feel yourself ready to follow it deeper. The host takes up the fukuza once more, unfolding it with a kind of precision that makes you aware of your own breathing. The silk flows like water between their fingers, catching the light in subtle ripples. They run it along the rim of the lacquer caddy, then over the lid, each motion deliberate, each pause intentional, as though these few square inches of silk are rewriting the air in the room. The kettle whispers steadily, steam drifting upward in threads so fine they almost disappear before your eyes can follow them. The host slides the caddy closer, cuts, then lifts the chishak with a bamboo scoop. It's familiar. Pale curve, now as much a part of the evening's rhythm as the kettle's hum. Mainstream fact. The number of scoops of matcha in a formal Edo period tea ceremony was rarely arbitrary. A standard thin tea wusicha might require 2 scoops, while a thick tea koicha, favored for more intimate or important gatherings, could demand 3 or more. The choice sent a message about the tone of the meeting and the relationship between host and guest. Tonight, the host measures 3 generous scoops into the bowl, the powder forming small green dunes against the ceramic surface. The smell is sharper, this time fresher, most electric in its greenness, like the moment a garden is hit by sudden summer rain. Historians still argue whether the increased serving in samurai contexts was simply a matter of taste, or if it symbolized abundance and generosity, meant to reassure or impress the guest. Some sources lean toward the former. Others insist that in a society so attuned to subtle messaging, nothing was ever just about taste. The ladle dips into the kettle again, K, and a measured stream of water falls into the bowl, K. The host picks up the whisk its bristles, now fully dry, from earlier and lowers it into the mixture. The strokes begin slow and deep, pressing the powder into the water, then quicken, the motion narrowing into a tight M pattern that you can almost hear in the faint, wet rustle of the bristles. Quirky tidbit: some Edo whisking techniques included a final, single, slow circle at the surface, nicknamed the moon's path, which was believed to smooth the froth and leave a perfect, unbroken sheen. Whether the moon's path is real or just poetic invention depends on which tea master you ask. The froth forms into a dense, glossy layer, the green deepening until it looks almost like velvet. The host lifts the whisk, taps twice against the bowl, then rests it neatly at the side. They rotate the bowl slightly toward you before sliding it forward. You bow, receive it with both hands, and turn it once, the glaze catching in the candlelight. The first sip is thicker, more concentrated. The bitterness more pronounced, but also richer, like a chord played in a lower register. It fills your mouth with warmth, the texture almost creamy. You drink slowly, savoring the weight of it until the last drop leaves the bowl. Lowering it to the tatami, you turn it back toward the host, who nods slightly before retrieving it. Joke 1. This is so smooth. I'm convinced even my clumsiest mug at home would feel elegant. The host places the bowl aside and folds the fukuza once more, its edges meeting with absolute precision. The kettle continues its soft murmur. The candles flame, bowing faintly with each draft from the garden, somewhere beyond the shoji. The sound of a distant temple bell drifts in low, resonant, and slow enough that you can feel it more than hear it. It rolls through the quiet like a wave, fading until only the warmth of its passing remains. The host's gaze follows yours toward the sound, but no words are spoken. There's no need. The rhythm of the evening holds everything that needs saying. Asterisk. You notice it only after the last thick sip settles, a sound that's been there all along. Steady as a heartbeat you forgot to count. The brazier, it doesn't roar or crackle. Purse heat, speaking in a language of ember and breath. You lean minutely toward it. Not enough to break posture, just enough to feel the way the air above the charcoal changes warmer by a whisper. Shaped like a dome you can almost see. The brazier sits square in the tatami, a dark mouth cut neatly into the woven gold. Its edges are trimmed in wood-worn satin smooth by sleeves and seasons. Inside, gray ash lies like a raked garden, each ripple deliberate, the faintest crescent ridges guiding your eye toward the iron kettle. The kettle itself is a planet of matte black, dimpled from the casting, beaded near the lip with a minute ring of condensed steam. Every few breaths, a tiny bubble climbs and releases with a sound so soft you feel it in your jaw more than you hear it. Mainstream fact. Tea rooms change their hearth with the seasons. In colder months, hosts opened the sunken hearth, the row set into the floor like this one, inviting bodies and breath to gather close to the center. In warmer months, they used the portable furo, a raised brazier that pushed heat away from the guests. The rhythm of row to furrow was a metronome the ear could feel. The host adjusts the lid of the kettle by a thumb's width. A movement so small, you almost miss it. The sound changes immediately. The hush shifts timbre, like a pine tree taking a deeper breath. That's not coincidence. Tea people call it matsukaze, wind in the pines, the ideal whisper a kettle should make when the charcoal is tended perfectly. It's less noise than presence, like hearing the inside of a shell. Historians still argue whether Edo period samurai hosts favored a stricter, more martial aesthetic for their fire's arrangements, spare to the point of followed softer wabi traditions that embraced irregularity and shadow. Schools disagree politely. Diaries contradict cheerfully. The brazier hums on, indifferent. The host reaches for iron tongs, their jaws slim and leaf-shaped. From a lidded ash jar, a brush appears goose feather bound to a bamboo handle, delicate as a courtier's fan, with 2 quick floating strokes. The host clears a breath path in the ash, revealing the head of a charcoal stick laid earlier. The feather makes no sound, but the ash remembers the touch. It's holding the new line like a quiet smile. Quirky tidbit, arranging charcoal, choosing carry, is an art within the art. Charcoal pieces are cut to specific shapes: head, heart, wing end placed in patterned sequences with names like cascading waterfall or bridges in snow. Hosts sometimes draw faint, raked ripples in the ash to suggest a stream around those bridges. The feather is both broom and brush. The hearth is a tiny landscape that only a few eyes will ever study. The tongs lift a glowing piece, its edges banded in orange, and nestle it closer to the kettle's belly. The change is immediate, not dramatic, a fraction warmer. A thinner plume of steam, the pine wine voice lowered by half a tone. The host's face doesn't change, but you feel a private satisfaction emanate from their stillness. This is how you tune a room by degrees so small they'd make a clock jealous. Joke. One drifts through your head. If my apartment heater had this level of finesse, winter would send a thank you note. Your eyes settle on the ash again. It's not just gray. It's a palette pearl, dove, Shadow. Tiny black spectral shivers sprinkled the surface like stray stars. You realize, with a surprising flicker of delight, that someone raked those crescents to curve toward the alcove. Subtle arrows saying, "Look, breathe, read." The whole room is pointing at itself, quietly. Mainstream fact hums under the calm. The charcoal used here wasn't any old wood burned down. Tea charcoal was often made from oak or nara, seasoned and fired to burn hot and clean with little smoke. Good sumi snapped like dry lacquer and rang faintly when tapped tea. Masters listened to their fuel as much as they watched it. The host lowers the iron lid a finger's width more. The kettle's voice softens again, the tone now so even you could set your posture by it. The warmth that gathers between you and the brazier rests on your shins, rises to your knees, then holds their hovering comfort that never quite reaches your face. Perfect. Warm enough to loosen the spine, cool enough to keep the mind unblurred. Historians still argue whether the subtle choreographies of fire, the number of charcoals added, the precise ash patterns were codified strictly in Edo or varied freely by region and school. Some treatises read like music notation. Das shrug and say, if the kettle sings right, the rest is commentary. A faint pop from a charcoal seam snaps and fades. The host doesn't flinch. Instead, those tongs nudge a sliver inward, and the pop does not repeat. You think of all the times a clumsy fire at home has demanded attention with a crackle and smoke. Here, mischief is negotiated down to a whisper, joke to whispers back. Somewhere, smoke alarm just felt excluded and doesn't know why. You become aware of the way light behaves near the brazier. The candle throws a low halo into the ash. Kettle reflects nothing, swallowing light like a well. Shadows on the tatami shift with the tiniest draft breathing around your knees. In that movement, the room gains a pulse you can match. Inhale peens, exhale steam, inhale tatami, exhale charcoal. Your shoulders drop the last half-inch of city they were still carrying. The host presents a small incense containers, ceramic. No bigger than a plum and cracks it open for a heartbeat. Not to perfume the room, this is not a perfumery, but to flavor the heat. A rice grain pinch disappears onto a coal. There's no cloud, only a suggestion. Wood after rain, temple beam in summer. The inside of a lacquer box that's been sleeping for a century. It rises, barely there, till your nose learns its new outline and stops remarking on it. Mainstream fact. The use of incense in tea, KD, was its own refined practice, with people trained to listen to incense, identifying woods by scent, families, and poetic names. In tea, it appears like a footnote brief, precise, meant to support, never lead. The kettle breathes. You glance at its lid and notice the tiniest tremor, as if a moth has landed there. The host sees it too, and, with 2 fingers, shifts the lid off-center, leaving a crescent gap for the steam to escape. The sound clears, and for one shining second, you understand why someone named the noise after pines. You swear you can see. Dark needles quiver against a mountain sky that isn't there. Quirky sidelight, some masters nicknamed that off-center lid the moon gate. Others insisted the lid should be centered so the moon can hide. Schools debated in whispers. Kettles continued making weather. Historians still argue whether this generational hair-splitting moon gate or no gate honestly matters, or is the point entirely a tradition so attentive that meaning condenses on millimeters? Your own breath falls into step with the kettles. The earlier sweets have left a clean sweetness at the back of your tongue. The thick tea has planted in your chest a small, evergreen warmth. Now the brazier rounds the moment like a final brushstroke that turns a sketch into something inevitable. The host tips the ash jar just enough to reveal a pale interior, almost luminous in the candlelight. A second feather finer than the first appears, and with it, the host draws a new pair of ripples, concentric and shallow. The gesture is so slight, you could blink and miss it. You don't. The ripples catch a shadow and hold it. The room seems larger by a little, as if the hearth has taught the tatami to breathe wider. You remember the street outside, the mist, the lantern. The Nornand feel the distance to it measured not in steps, but in decibels. The outside is all straight noises. The inside is curved ones. Even time has curved. You have no idea how long you've been kneeling, and you don't care. Your knees, surprisingly, have decided not to complain. They are warmed, persuaded, bribed by pines and Ashdod joke. 3 rises like steam. I came here to drink tea, and instead got seduced by a very quiet space heater. There's a story embedded in the brazier that you didn't know you were learning. That heat wants boundaries. That boundaries can be soft. That fire is at its most civilized when it seems to be doing nothing at all. The samurai who sat in rooms like this weren't tamed by ceremony, okay? They were invited to a precision that made rashness sound as out of place as shouting in a library. A kettle can't sign a treaty, but it can teach a table how to wait. Mainstream fact folds back in. Manuals from the Edo period included entire sections on the way of fire, specifying charcoal lengths, angles, and the sequence of additions to carry a gathering seamlessly from first bowl to last. A host who let the kettle falter mid-visit wasn't merely unskilled. Adea broken the room's grammar. The host's tongs rest. The feather sleeps in ash. The kettle's wind in pines keeps the sentence unbroken. Your own hands, resting on your thighs, feel the faint radiation of heat like a remembered kindness. If the evening had been a river, this would be its deep, slow bend, no hurry, no froth. Only depth and time. From somewhere beyond the shoji, the smallest breeze gathers, slips through, and tests the candle. The flame leans, considers rebellion, and then returns to its post. The paper panels flex a millimeter and hold. The garden, you're certain, has just sent a pine-scented nod. You look once more into the ash and find that the crescents you admired have already softened. Heat blurs hard edges. Breath smooths deliberate lines. That's fine. The pattern wasn't made to last. It was made to be right now. When the host tends the fire again later, a new ripple will appear, honest to the moment that needs it. There's a comfort in that. It's a lesson that tries to sit in your pocket and follow you home. Arrange the heat, tune the sound, touch lightly, leave room for air. The rest, the talk, the deals, the poems can find their footing on that. You let the lesson perch on your sleeve like a tame bird, promising not to scare it off with sudden movements. The host lifts their gaze to you. No words, the brazier hums, the kettle breathes, and in the corner of your eye, the camellia in the alcove looks wider than before, as if the room has polished it with patience. You give the smallest nod of acknowledgement, not to the host exactly, not to the brazier alone, but to the sum of tuned quiet that has gathered itself around all of you and now, unavoidably, around you. Asterisk, you let your eyes return to the alcove. This time, not as a polite glance, but as a visit. The tokonoma is only a shallow niche, a pause in the wall, yet it carries more gravity than a stage. A single hanging scroll, kakemono, occupies the vertical like a breath pulled tall. The mountain silk is a quiet brown, edged with a thread of cloud blue that almost disappears unless the candle leans. The paper itself holds the soft, fibrous irregularity of handmade sheets. Light lives inside it rather than on top. The ink reads like weather, 3 characters, brushed with a confidence that keeps just short of swagger. The first stroke starts heavy and lifts. The second moves like a swallow's flight. The third lands as softly as ash. You can't parse the text yet, but the host turns slightly permission again. you give it the time it asks for. Mainstream fact. In tea rooms of Edo, the scroll is the thesis statement. Hosts often chose calligraphy by Zen monks' phrases such as Ichigo, Ichi, one time, one meeting, or seasonal verses from classical poetry. The work sets the gathering's temperature. Bowls, sweets, and even the brazier's ash pattern quietly echo it. Here the characters are not a famous cone, at least not one you recognize. The host eventually breaks the silence, voice low enough to sit beside the kettle's hush rather than on top of it. Muj no Michi, an unobstructed path, not a command. A weather report for the evening. No alliances declared, no blades sheathed or rattled, just a road without gates inside a room that loves thresholds. Historians still argue whether samurai patrons used the scrolls to smuggle messages, political signals, coded as aesthetics. Whether that's a modern romantic projection onto people who simply liked good ink. Diaries give both answers. One retainer boasts of reading a rival's hidden meaning in a single brushhook. Another writes, relieved, that the scroll said only autumn clear. And everyone acted like human beings for once. You notice the seals and cinnabarred 2 square stamps near the lower corner, each a tiny maze of lines. They anchored the composition, like red stones in snow. The mounting cloth is unshowy, an Edo preference after the previous century's flash, hand-woven okiero browns and compressed field greens. If you think of how easily extravagance could shout in a room this small, strained is the only accent that doesn't stomp. Quirky tidbit. Collectors prize the Baki brush spirit over legibility. A crooked, breathless line by a revered monk might rank above a flawless copy. Some tea men even favored winter ink ground with icy water, claiming it produced a harder tone that sharpened the mind. Whether that's chemistry or poetry, the myth warmed a lot of cold wrists. The host slides forward on knees no rush. No scrape hand lifts a tiny cedar stand, so the lower roller of the scroll sits a finger higher. That single adjustment changes the way the composition breathes, as if a window moved a thumb width and the whole garden view improved. You had not known a scroll could inhale. Now you do. Joke 1 sidles up. Imagine rearranging your living room by raising a picture frame half an inch and calling it enlightenment. You studied the paper. The fibers float like faint clouds. Occasionally, a wisp catches a gleam and disappears. The ink's edges feather at the microscale, evidence of a careful load on a brush and a paper that welcomed it. No modern sizing, here's the dance of water and fiber. You've seen prints. This is not that. This is a hand's timeline captured in black dot. Mainstream fact. The wrong scroll breaks a tea. Manuals from Edo spend pages on seasonal appropriateness. No plum blossom in midsummer. No snow landscape in early fall end on congruence. A stormy Zen maxim would jar beside delicate spring sweets. Hosts were expected to think like composers. The alcove supplied the key signature. The host named the calligrapher softly. A priest from Daitokuji, few rain eras back. A name you've heard in the margins of poetry collections and the footnotes of Sword. This treatise is proof that the same minds could move ink and steel. You picture a temple veranda, an inkstone, someone watching pines test the wind before pressing bristles to paper. The scroll becomes less object, more visitation. Historians still argue about literacy levels among samurai and the depth of their Zen practice, book owners versus book readers, posture versus insight. Okay, the tea room muddies the binary. Hear you. Read with your skin as much as your eyes. Even if the characters elude you, brush tells you what kind of breath made them. The alcove, flower, the winter. Camellia plays rhythm section to the scroll's melody. Its white is not the white of chalk, but of milk washed with moonlight. No scent announces itself. The camellia is known for restraint. A pine sprig leans behind it, needles drawn like a fine comb. Together, they speak winter without complaint. The bamboo vase is cut at a slant, inside glossed with the plant's own lacquer. Its node ring shows like a knuckle, resisting the room's polish. Quirky tidbit: some hosts listen to camellias by the way they drop entire blossoms, releasing without shedding petals. Clean exit, prized for its dignity. Others avoided camellias entirely near high-ranking guests, anxious that a sudden drop might be read as a bad omen. Superstition makes even flowers political. You catched at the scroll's bottom, Rollachukugi's plain cedar, rather than ivory or lacquer. Edo, thrift, wabi preference, or a deliberate leveling in a samurai's house that elsewhere wears swords like punctuation. The more you look, the more the room insists, we can afford to be quiet. Joke, too, arrives gently. Minimalism here. 1,000-year lineage. 3 strokes of ink, 1 flower. Minimalism at home. 1 chair and a pile of laundry achieving modern sculpture. A moth wing of smoke from the brazier threads toward the alcove and dissolves, never quite reaching the paper. You realize the host has placed the hearth and set the kettle vent so the airstream curves away from the art and aerodynamic courtesy you did not know a room could grant. Everything here is placed to help everything else survive gracefully. Mainstream fact: the tokonoma itself was once a status feature in domestic architecture. Guests of honor sat nearest it, backs to the alcove, facing the room both honored by proximity and tasked with embodying the scroll's spirit. In tea rooms, that assignment becomes intimate. You feel the phrase nudging your posture from behind. You tilt your head and trace the calligraphy's pressure shifts, beginning heavy, lifting light, then landing with just enough ink to say, "Stop here, not further." The blank around the characters becomes its own character mark, the meaningful interval, a silence made visible. Tea is full of mar, between whisk strokes, between bowls, tween bowls. Even now, it accumulates in the air like dew. Historians still argue whether ma can be taught or only caught, for the manual's grids of timing and placement actually produce this felt spaciousness. Or if the spaciousness is the point that escapes codification. Schools promise both apprentices, right? Both rooms deliver what they can. The host leans in and, with a thumb and forefinger, taps the lower roll to settle it. The tap is so soft that you register it more in the eyes than the ear. The paper straightens by a fraction. Crease near the top forgets itself. Suddenly, the phrase reads as if spoken with better diction. You think about all the times you've tried to fix a scene with volume when a millimeter would have done. Quirky sidelight. Connoisseurs developed a taste for remounted scrolls, patina of repaired tears, edges turned kintsugi in fiber and paste rather than gold. Minted mounting could be more beautiful to a TI than a perfect first edition. History visible. Craft confessed. Joke 3 strolls in. Bows shallowly. I aspired to be remounted. Same content. Calmer borders. Your attention softens wide. The alcove blurs and returns, like breathing with your eyes. The rest of the room composes itself around that axis: braziers, low hum, kettles, pine song, a camellia practicing invisibility. A phrase that refuses to be a slogan. You feel how this could guide a conversation without entering it. How 2 people could sit with hands wrapped around bowls and find that disagreements narrowed to edges words can cross without breaking. An unobstructed path. Indoors. Mainstream fact. Tucked in like a bookmark. Tea-men of Edo often trained in link verse sessions ringa, den haikai, where one poem becomes an invitation to another. The scroll is the first verse here. The whisk, the sweets, the ash, your shared posture, every element places a link. If anyone decides to speak, they might discover the talk was already underway. A faint draft lifts one corner of the mounting silk and lets it fall. The candle leans, rights itself. The host does not move. You're tempted to bow to the alcove itself. But you understand that your bow would belong not to wood and paper, but to the choice behind them. You settle for a breath that lengthens, 4 shoulders that agree to release another notch of city. What remains once you've looked, you feel, is not an analysis you can summarize. It's a sensation of room temperature thought, warm enough to coax, but cool enough to keep edges. The scroll says Muge, no Michi, and the room believes it. You're permitted, briefly, to believe it too. The path in here is unobstructed. Tatami seemed to bowl to breath, breath to ink, ink to pine, pine to steam, steam to silence. Silence to you. When you look away, the alcove stays looking at you. That's fine. Let it. The next act is beginning. Anyhow, the host's hands have found the silk, the ladle, the whisk. The thesis will remain on the wall while the body of the evening pours, folds, and clears. The garden inhales somewhere beyond paper. The kettle keeps its promise. The scroll holds the door open without needing hinges. Asterisk somewhere behind you. A sound like the breath of parchment, the faintest flecks of paper, fibers draws your attention toward the shoji. You didn't hear the latch. You didn't see a hand. The panel simply seems to lean in with the draft. The light through it is not daylight tits, the pearled glow of a paper lantern outside. It's moving slightly, carrying the slow pulse of its flame. You feel that breeze before you properly smell it. It's not the iron taps of the brazier's heat. It's sharp and green, then sweet, then gone. Pine, somewhere in the garden beyond. A pine's needles have been combed by night air, and the room has taken a polite sip of that aroma. Mainstream. In fact, in Edo tea houses, shoji weren't only for privacy, they were air conductors. Builders oriented rooms so the prevailing wind could pass through layers of garden and tatami, cooling guests without blowing directly across the hearth. Paper was the perfect filter, porous enough to breathe, dense enough to diffuse. The host notices the stir, or perhaps expected it, and slides the shoji panel a fraction wider. The motion is soundless until the wooden rail meets its stoppa, soft click, like a pebble set on moss. The space opened is small, maybe enough for a cat to slip through. Yet the whole room seems to inhale on cue. Historians still argue whether tea rooms always embraced such natural interruptions, or whether some schools kept shoji rigid once guests were seated. Cert diaries praise the season's breath as essential. Others note the master ceiling panels to preserve the heart's temperature. Like most things in tea, the rule seems to have been, do whatever serves the moment. Best, through the gap, you glimpse a sliver of garden. The moon isn't visible, but you see its proof of spill of silver over stepping stones. A shadow netted by the branches of a maple stripped bare. There's the pine, too, its needles glinting like the edges of lacquer-combed teeth. Somewhere, farther, water moves to faint for stream, too constant for drip. Perhaps a stone basin with a bamboo spout, the kind samurai would wash their hands in before entering. Quirky tidbit. Some hosts would place sukubai basins deliberately off the main path, forcing guests to bend and turn, which both humbled the posture and slowed the mind. It was etiquette disguised as landscaping. The paper panel nearest you has a repaired patch, a small rectangle of newer washi, its fibers running at a slightly different angle from the rest. The repair is invisible unless you look for it. Now that you have, you can't unsee it. It reads as both wound and badge. You imagine a careless sleeve, or a winter gust, or the playful paw of a K-10 event the room has absorbed and translated into texture. Joke 1 arrives with the draft. In my apartment. That's called I'll fix it next weekend. Here, it's a design choice with a lineage. The garden breath sends the candle flame leaning toward the scroll, stops just short of touching it, and retreats. The pine note lingers longer this time, followed by the mineral whisper of damp stone. The smell plays like a chord. Resin at the top, clean rock in the middle, cold air at the base. Mainstream fact. Pine was more than a tree in Edo Gardens. It was an emblem of longevity and steadfastness. Pruned to disciplined shapes, pines framed tea paths and lent their scent to both summer heat and winter frost. Their needles in the wind were a living form of matsukaze, the kettle's whisper. The host glances toward the garden opening, then meets your gaze briefly. No words, just a small acknowledgement. Yes, we share this air. The kettle's steam seems to drift more slowly now, its white strands mingling with the breath from outside. The two airs negotiate space without collision. Historians still argue about whether certain tea gardens were designed to perform for indoor guest arranging moonlight, wind, and scent in ways as intentional as scroll selection. Surviving records describe borrowed landscapes where a distant mountain was framed like an alcove object. Others insist the garden's role was only to be itself. Whatever the weather brought. The shoji trembles faintly again, as if to prove its own part in the ritual. The sound is nothing like a creak. It's the murmur of paper fibers shifting, a sound that might be the closest man-made cousin to a moth's wing beat. You find yourself holding your breath to hear it, realizing too late that the holding is louder than the thing itself. Quirky sidelight. Certain artisans trained key their ear to judge the quality of washi by the tone it made when lightly tapped or flexed. A soft, deep note meant long fibers and proper drying. A brittle, sharp note hinted at rushed production. The shoji here sings in the register of patience. The host, without rising, leans toward the opening and slides a tiny wedge of cedar into the rail to keep it fixed. The action is practical, preventing the breeze from sliding the panel shut, but also symbolic. The little nod that says, "The night is invited to stay." Joker drifts in on that symbolism. Imagine inviting the night over, and it actually RSVP'd. Through the crack, a small moth drifts in. Not toward the candle as you expect, but toward the alcove. It flutters once near the camellia, then settles on the pine sprig behind it. The host's eyes follow it, but no hand moves to shoo it away. In this room, apparently, moths qualify as seasonal decor. Mainstream fact. In some Edo tea traditions, an unplanned guest, a falling leaf, a bird call, a stray insect was seen as a gift from the environment, a reminder that the room is not a sealed container. Poets wrote about such arrivals as Tenri Heaven Sent. The breeze shifts again, and this time it brings a cooler layer, threading between your sleeves and your skin. It doesn't make you shiver, it just writes its presence on your arms. Somewhere outside, a bell, distant, metallic, slow counts the hour. Edo's night watch, perhaps, marking time for a city you can't hear from here. Historians still argue, about how insulated samurai tea gatherings were from the noise and grit of the city. Some records suggest gatherings in urban tea houses, where the clop of horses and calls of fishmongers seeped through. Others imply rooms like this, buffered by gardens, where only curated sounds arrived. The host takes advantage of the moment, reaching for the ladle as the kettle's voice dips in volume, heat nudged by the cool draft. You watch the water pour in a longer arc than before, steam rising to meet the garden air halfway. The two vanish together, an evaporation that feels mutual. Quirky tidbit. Seasoned hosts could tell from the sound of the pour whether the water was at white bubble, stage, or string boil, adjusting the ceremony to match. They might even lift the ladle higher in winter, so the arc of steam warmed guests' hands before reaching the bowl. Joke 3 surfaces. Tea physics, because sometimes you want your steam to socialize before the sip. The shoshi's frame casts a thin, slanted shadow across the tatami, its angle shifting with the lantern outside. You track it without meaning to, finding that it marks time better than a clock. No numbers. Slight, slowly learning another shape. The host doesn't close the panel again. The garden stays with you now. Its air weaving into the ceremony. Its scent folding into the match's bitterness. Its coolness tempering the brazier's steady heat. The room is no longer a sealed chamber. It's a lung, breathing in from pine and stone, breathing out into camellia and scroll. And you, whether you meant to or not are, breathing with it. You let the room coast on its own inertia. The last circle of steam fades. The shoji gap holds its sliver of night. And the kettle's pine breath keeps time so gently, you forget there was ever any other meter. Nothing happens for a while, and that is the happening. Your hands settle on your thighs. The tatami gives a little under your knuckles, okay? And you realize your spine has learned the rooms, okay? Straightness without being scolded into it. The pause between bowls is not empty. It is full of the things that prefer not to speak. You watch the whisk rest like a small sunburst where the host laid it. You notice a bead of water caught on one bristle, refusing gravity longer than seems reasonable, then giving in without fuss. You follow the faint line in the lacquer caddy where someone's thumb, decades ago, wore the gloss a shade softer. The room offers a scavenger hunt for patience, and you find more than you expected. Mainstream fact, informal tea lineages of the Edo period. This interval mall was cultivated as deliberately as any whisking technique. Manuals describe time in the lull to the kettle's sound, letting the wind in pines lead breath and posture. The pause allowed taste to settle, heat to equalize, okay, and minds to meet without words. Across from you, the host has turned slightly toward the alcove again, not to adjust anything, just to borrow its calm. Sleeves pull neatly at wrist bones. Their hands rest with the loose, alive stillness of a calligrapher between strokes. You mirror them without meaning to. Okay. The pause is contagious by design. Outside, a single cicada begins, tentative, and is answered by another farther off, the sound stepping around the garden stones and through the shoji slit. The brazier hum doesn't object. It simply shifts from solo to accompaniment. You think of how loudly days usually clatter and how much permission you've been given to hear nothing. Historians still argue whether such cultivated silences in samurai tea were primarily aesthetic or tactical. Did these men practice quiet as refinement, or did they use it to read a room, weigh a proposition, and measure a guest's nerves? Both possibilities sit comfortably here. A silence that looks like art can also be a tool that looks like patience. Your breath lengthens until it matches the kettle. Inhale, paper, tatami, camellia, stem. Exhale, charcoal, lacquer, pine. A mind wants to narrate, to name, to label. The room keeps answering with verbs so soft they barely count as action. Settle, warm, linger, cool, wait. You reach for the small packet of folded paper in your sleeve casing. Let it rest in your lap. You used it a moment ago, to cradle sweets. Now it's simply there, a square of whiteness you could, if pressed, jot a verse upon. Quirky tidbit. Edo guests sometimes used keishi as quiet notebooks during linked verse gatherings after tea. The paper that met sugar could also meet ink, the day's tastes and words stored together. You do not write. The blank belongs to the room. The host glances at the kettle lit. The slightest tremor returns at the edge hand, leaves it where it is. The exact same fact you noticed earlier can, in a pause, be allowed to remain a fact instead of a cue. Not every detail demands adjustment. Some simply deserve witnessing. Joke 1 tiptoes through your head. Imagine letting a to-do list sit politely in the corner until it learns. Table manners. You remember the scroll's phrase, Muj, no Michi, unobstructed path, and realize the lull is its truest reading. Between bowls, nothing blocks anything. Breath, scent, heat. The thin line of lantern light cutting its diagonal across the tatami scene. Even your thoughts stop elbowing for position. They queue and wait their turn like decent citizens. Somewhere outside the wall, a watchman's clappers tick the hour wood on wood, too short, one long Edo's heartbeat for the sleeping city. The signal glides across water and tile and pine, and arrives in the room already softened. The house hears it. The room declines to change shape, mainstream fact. Folded into the quiet, like a card under a cup, the Tokugawa shogunate's Sankin Kate. Alternate attendance system kept daimyo cycling between Edo and their domains, making the capital a hive of scheduled comings and goings. Tea rooms like this sat in that flow, hosting meetings where presence mattered as much as speech. Pauses were not dead time. They were calibrated intermissions in an era disciplined by clocks, clappers, and calendars. Your knees against all expectations. Our content, Brazier's warmth, laps your shins in gentle tides, rising and falling with the kettle's breath. Shoshi's slit drafts a faint coolness along your forearms, riding a quiet escurve of air from wrist to elbow. Where the two meet heat and cool, Brazier and night your skin finds the room's neutral. You let your eyes half close, not a nap. It's just a soft focus of not hunting for anything. Through that blur, the whisk becomes a halo, the caddy a small moon, the bowl a pond. The camellia's white folds into the paper of the scroll until you can't tell which surface holds the light. The room does what good rooms do, teaches your senses to share. Historians still argue whether guests in samurai tea routinely composed poems in these pauses or kept minds blank per stricter Zen ideals. Some journals preserve impeccable couplets, dated to a specific gathering. Others praise the poem that is no poem, a mind rinsed clear enough to receive the next bowl as if it were the first dot. The host shifts not forward, not back, but into a deeper version of stillness, like a dancer, settling into a held pose. You follow, barely adjusting your sit bones, and somewhere between one breath and the next, the pause ripens. You know it's ready, not because anything changes, but because you feel an invisible threshold roll under. Your knees like a small wave, passing quirky sidelight. Certain schools taught hosts to watch the meniscus of tea left clinging inside a guest's bowl. When the ring dried to a particular machine, the palate had reset, and the next serving could truly be tasted. Whether legend or trick of humidity, hosts developed a weather sense for this readiness. Joked yawns, indulgent. Imagine, if conversations waited for palates instead of pings, you turn your keishi over once, hearing the papery whisper. The edge carries a faint aroma of sugar you didn't notice when you were busy being given sugar. A sweetness outlives itself for a while. To pause, let's be honest about that. The host, still silent, reaches not for the ladle or the whisk but for a tiny water jar at the periphery. Its lid, lacquered, plain, its body ceramic, so thin you can see a shadow of fingers through it when it lifts. They place it closer to the hearth and do nothing with it. Promise placed on the table, forward in time. The pause now contains future action, the way a shell contains a sea. You can hear but not see. Mainstream fact. The rhythm of time procedure often includes such staging tools arriving before their turn. Edo treatises map these advances and delays like choreography, with room for a host's interpretation. The interval is not only breath, it is structure, a quiet scaffolding you can't see until you feel its strength, beyond the shoji. A stray drop ticks from bamboo onto stone, a metronome set too far to keep strict time, perfect for keeping company. The kettle considers, adjusts a note you wouldn't have thought needed adjusting, and continues. In the alcove, the scroll says nothing. You believe it more for that. Historians still argue whether the famed austerity of Edo tea was a corrective. Too earlier extravagance or a fashionable pose carried a touch too far by urban connoisseurs. Merchants started dressing their restraint in exquisite taste. Samurai curated severity like a luxury. The pause does not care which theory you pick. It receives you either way. You breathe in, out, as if reading the characters with lungs instead of eyes. You let a thought about tomorrow approach the threshold of your mind and politely decline entrance. You let a memory of what brought you here tonight look through the shoji crack and stay outside. You practice not inviting. It feels like a talent you could take home and use in rooms with fewer willows and more DOORBELLS. Joke, 3 pads in. Smiling. New productivity. Hacks, casual meetings with a kettle. Asterisk, the host finally moves. It's nearly nothing. A tiny rotation of the water jar, aligning its seam with the seam in the tatami. 2 lines that were merely neighbors become a sentence. The room nods, or you do, or both. You understand without needing anyone to tell you that the next bowl is on its way. Not because the clock said so, but because the silence has completed its work. Asterisk, before the tools rise again. You take one last, unhurried look at everything. The pause gathered and blended. The shoshi's repaired square. The brazier's ash ripples already softening. The whisk's single clinging bead now gone. The camellia performing the difficult theater of not falling. The scroll's ink drying a little. More in your understanding. The smell of pine finishing its last sentence in your nose. In the room itself, you host. You, the garden, the smoke, the paper. The water rests together in a single shape for the width of 2 heartbeats. Not a frozen still life, a living one. Then the ladle will lift, and the whisk will sink, and the bowl will be green again. But the space between bowls will keep working on you long after you leave. The way a bell does after its struck body looks calm. The host's fingers find the ladle. You realize you are already ready. Pause has done exactly what it came to. Do made room. Asterisk, the host's fingers find the ladle, and the pause tips forward into motion without losing its softness. A thin thread of water rises from the kettle and arcs into the waiting bowl, steam sketching a brief S over the tatami before folding into the room's breath. You've learned this sequence by now. Scoop, pour, whisk. Present, but endings deserve a new kind of attention. This next bowl closes the circle, and the room's grammar leans toward it. The fukusa slips once around the caddy's lid. A punctuation mark you've started to hear with your eyes. The chishaku dips and returns, green, powder balanced with a calm you envy. 2 measures, then a third. That's the size of a secret. The sound of powder finding ceramic is still nothing, which is somehow louder than everything you left outside. Mainstream fact, many lineages close. A formal gathering with the last thin tea bowl, you sucha after thick tea lighter. More refreshing, a cordial good night to the palate. Others end on the intimate note of shared koicha, 1 bowl passed among guests to make the group literally of one taste. Which path the host chose said something about the mood and the relationship at the table. Your host chooses light. The whisk enters like it knows how to finish a sentence. It's time. The strokes are smaller, quicker, less architectural than before, like tying a knot in air. Froth gathers in a fine, uniform skin. No big bubbles, no loud texture, just a jade hush. The whisk lifts, taps, twice soft. Things softer and rests. Historians still argue whether samurai houses preferred the shared bowl. Finished to emphasize unity, or kept 2 individual bowls to keep sleeves, mouths, and messages separate. The record is annoyingly democratic. Both appear, depending on clan, teacher, and occasion. Tonight, the host seems to choose clarity over theater. The bowl turns toward you. You bow, receive with both hands, and feel the ceramics particular. Warmth, no, hotter than before. Somehow warmer to you. You rotate so the bowl's face stays untouched. the decorated side offered to the room, not your lips. First sip lands like a soft chord, green, clean, a little sweet from memory, rather than sugar. You let it sit on your tongue long enough for the brazier's heat to meet it halfway. Choke one drifts up like steam. I could write an apology note to every paper cup I've ever disrespected with teabag water. You tip for a second sip, smaller, turning the bowl a hair as you drink, not because you must, but because the movement feels like part of the closing. When only a crescent remains, you take the accepted final slurp quiet in this school, audible enough to say, I noticed. In many rooms, the last sound is allowed to be a sound. A ceremony needs a period. Quirky tidbit. Some Edo teachers coached the farewell slurp so precisely volume, duration, placement that students practiced with water bowls in back rooms, the way musicians rehearse cadences. Elsewhere, any hint of volume was frowned into non-existence. The whisk. Schools disagreed. The kettles remained Switzerland. You lower the bowl to the tatami, rotate it back so its best side faces the host and the room, and bound a deep fold yet. Just the guests. Thanks. The host answers with a mirror of your angle. Equal distance. Equal acknowledgement. To return the bowl, you edge it forward slightly on your fingertips, keeping your palm off the mat. A small choreography of respect learned in 10 minutes that took a culture centuries to polish. The host receives, specs, the rim you kissed, and inclines their head. That glance isn't hygiene. It's manners confirming you will serve what you should have been served, and that the world is still aligned in the places that matter tonight. Mainstream fact. The bow that ends a formal service is often deeper than a greeting bow, especially if thick tea was shared. Orders vary by school, but the logic is steady. We leave lower than we entered, emptied and leveled by what we did together. The host moves the bowl aside and returns the whisk to its stand bristles, reined straight by. A quick rinse, collar aligned, handle exactly squared to a tatami seam. The chishaku rests across the caddy again, its pale crescent now a familiar moon. Kettle's lid is nudged to a slightly wider gap, one last kindness to steam and sound, then settled back to its working position. Safe to say, the room can hum on without being watched. You feel the closing gather like a hush before snowfall. Host turns toward you fully now, hands on thighs, spine a single brushstroke. You mirror the posture. The tatami presses a quiet grid into your shins, helpful lines for a body learning to be straight without stiffness. Breath in, breath out. The ball begins low, an unhurried forehead moving toward the mat, hands sliding forward to cradle the moment rather than push it away. Your eyes soften toward the seam where the mats meet, a little valley of woven straw that somehow looks like a welcome mat for thoughts you no longer need. You don't crash into the bottom of the bow. You arrive gently and pause in that low horizon long enough to mean it. Historians still argue whether the exact angle of a closing bow was codified for samurai, specifically deeper for higher ranks, subtler for equal soar, whether T preferred to level everyone under the roof for an hour. Differences left outside with sandals and swords. Manuals suggest gradations. Tea rooms tell a sweeter story. You rise with the host, shoulders staying quiet. No dramatic inhale to announce the end. The end has already happened. You're just catching up to it. Your gaze lifts to neutral, never hunting for eyes, never dodging them and holds. The host now performs a small, almost private rite with the bowl. A final wipe of the rim with chakin, a turn to admire the kill mark you made sure not to touch, and a second, slower look that belongs to the potter, not to you. In some houses, the bowl might be offered to guests for appreciation, turning in hands, noting glaze crawl, foot ring, warp, the kill's gossip made visible. Tonight, the look is brief, as if to say, beauty was used properly. That is enough. Quirky tidbit. Tea folk collect bowls the way readers collect first editions by provenance and personality. Some bowls have nicknames: family trees, scandalous, past the one that cracked and still poured perfect foam. Others are humble and beloved because they never get in the way. The host sets the bowl down to one side, farther from the hearth, as if its work tonight has earned cooler air. Ladle, caddy, whisk, cloth, itch, tool finds a resting place that feels inevitable now that you've seen it placed. The room's table of contents closes itself, choked settles in. Polite. If my desk ever learned to put each object down with this much intention, my productivity would file a patent. A last, almost invisible exchange remains. The host, facing you, lets the hands float 1 finger width off the thighs and lower again, a gesture as slight as a moss wing that still reads as thank you for coming all the way here. You answer with the smallest tilt of chin. The room has trained you to fluency in 30 syllables worth of movement. Mainstream fact. Formal phrases often accompany this moment's set lines of gratitude and humility. In many gatherings, the guest thanks the host for the trouble taken. The host demurs. The guest praises the utensils or the water's sweetness. The host passes credit to the season, the fire, the teacher. Edo diaries note both chat and silence here. The words, when used, are choreography, too. You let your keishi rest on the tatami again and bow, once more, simpler, shorter, a footnote bow. The host mirrors it. Somewhere outside, the bamboo spout ticks on stone again, and the brazier's matsukaze rides the gap in the shoji and comes back round your ankles. A tidy ecosystem of air says its own farewell. For a heartbeat, you consider what the room has done to time, stretched it enough to be softened, folded it enough to fit into a bowl. Your body inventory, knees warm but calm, shoulders an inch lower. Then they arrived, jaw, not trying to rearrange the world. You did not accomplish anything in a modern sense. Something accomplished you a little. Joke 3 bows with you. Turns out my favorite productivity hack is kneeling, very quietly, until my brain forgets how to sprint. The host reaches toward the utensils. Hey, and you know, the next chapter, cleaning, returning tools to their sleeping orders, about to begin. But this section is for the last sip and the last bow. And you sit in its afterglow like a stone still holding sun when the shade moves in. The bowl's trace of warmth lingers on your fingers. The camellia declines to drop its bloom good manners to the end. The scroll does what good language does and grows larger in silence. The pine breath threads one more stitch through the air between you, K, and the person who tuned water into weather and invited you to listen. You match their stillness a moment longer, letting the bow reverberate until its echo fades to the same pitch as the cattle. Only then do your hands find your thighs again, ready to witness order descend on the table of implements, ready to learn the art of putting the night away without waking it. You realize you've learned the tools' faces the way you learn people's, the bowl's warp where your lip rested, scoopsnick where perhaps a teacher once corrected a grip, squisk's small, proud wire of a bristle that never quite joins the chorus. Utility, personality, history layered like lacquer, thin coat by thin coat, cured between seasons. The host's final look takes in all of it, and then, because leaving a room is part of making it, they let their gaze pass beyond the implements to you, as if to confirm you can carry this quiet without dropping it at the threshold. You nod, not big, not theatrical, just enough to say, I will try. Historians still argue whether what tea taught samurai mattered outside these paper walls. Did an hour of finely tuned stillness change how decisions were made, how tempers were kept, how edges were softened in a hard world? The records can't agree. Rooms like this make their own case without testimony. When the host lifts the tumabako and the bowl toward the side cabinet. A tiny thread of incense heat rises from the ash and disappears. The feather lies in its glassy bed as if it has never moved. The kettle is a black planet gone into eclipse. The room is suddenly bare of action and full of aftermath. You look once more at the seam where the mats meet the valley. Your eyes visited during the closing bound. You feel a small, impossible gratitude toward woven grass, toward water, measured by ear, toward bamboo, shaped by patient knives, toward hands that practice to make quiet hold. The cleaning has not been a cleanup. It has been a return, each object back to its line, each sound back to its whisper, each breath back to a pace the city forgets on purpose. Your job now is simple. Leave like you arrived awake, 2 thresholds. Aware that the air changes when you cross them. The host rests hands on thighs. You mirror. The room's grammar resolves into a period. Somewhere beyond the shoji, the bamboo spout ticks stone. The camellia pretends not to hear. The scroll keeps the path clear. You've been taught, without lecture, how to end something well. Asterisk, the tools have gone quiet. The kettle's voice has thinned to a sigh. In the room sits as composed as a finished poem. The host turns toward the shoji, and you understand? The evening has one more page to read, and it's written in air and stone. A palm meets the paper lattice. The panel slides with that soft wooden whisper that only well-loved rails make. The gap widens, not the cautious catwith from before, but a human invitation in garden. Darkness pours in like cool tea. You shift forward on your knees and rise with care, palms briefly on the tatami, to thank the floor for carrying you. The edge of the threshold is a lesson all its own wood-worn satin smooth, where countless sleeves and socks have crossed. You pause there, because pausing here is part of the grammar you've learned. Acknowledge the inside, acknowledge the outside, then step. Mainstream fact: tea houses traditionally linked to a small Rogier-du path. Garden designed to rinse the mind between world and ceremony. It's not a display garden. It's a corridor of quiet, stone, moss, a wash basin, lantern, and a path that makes you slow down are the standard cast. Edo builders refined the roji to be almost invisible in daylight and perfectly legible by lantern and moon. The first breath of night meets you with pine and damp earth. A stone lantern stands at shoulder height, its window cut like a sleepy eye. The light inside is no brighter than the candles, just enough to sketch edges where your feet need them. The stepping stones are deliberately irregular, set at distances that keep you from striding. You place your foot on the first one and feel the chill come up through your sock like a polite warning. Walk as if you're carrying water. Historians still argue whether the roji's austerity emerged from spiritual frugality or from a practical need to keep fires and pride low in a city wary of flames and fashion. The debate has its own moss by now. Either way, the effect tonight is simple. You become smaller in the best possible way. To your left, a sukubai crouches, bamboo spout tilted over a shallow stone basin. Waterfalls and measured drops from the kake, each tick a tiny bell. You bend toward it instinctively, even though you washed before entering earlier. To basins. Rim is wet and cold under your fingertips. Your breath fogs and thins on the stone. You dip the bamboo ladle, lift, and pour over your hands. The water's chill writes the last of the room's warmth into your skin as memory instead of heat. Quirky tidbit: some tea men salted their sukubai ever so lightly in winter, not enough to taste, just enough to keep a skin of ice from forming on crucial nights. Others preferred to break the thinnest ice film on purpose, claiming the crack was the purest prelude to tea. You can hear both schools arguing in your head and smile at the kind of opinion that only shows up when people care this much about quiet. The path ahead jogs at a right angle, not to confuse you, but to make you turn your shoulders to the world. Azaleas, pruned into green clouds, hold their breath along the edge. Plum trunk leans with that elegant fatigue old trees earn. Moss is plush and dark where the stones don't intrude. A field of carefully managed softness. Your sandals rest back at the entrance, so each stone greets the sole of your foot through thin cotton with a different accent, one slick, one rough, one faintly cupped with a shallow pool of rain. Asterisk, joke one tiptoes in. Only here could a pebble teach a masterclass in posture. The host walks ahead, sleeves quiet, lantern light chasing their shadow from stone to stone. They do not speak. Taya does enough of that in commas and ellipses. You notice how the lanterns don't line the path like runway lights. They wait at turns like punctuation. And you, good reader that you've been trained to be, never miss a period. Mainstream fact. The roji was often divided into outer and inner gardens, separated by a simple gate or a change in paving. Guests would pause at the gate, sometimes to wait for the host to signal, sometimes simply to breathe. The choreography builds humility into the feet. By the time you reach the tea room, more leave tuve practiced arriving. A low bamboo fence, the kind that emits breezes and denies shortcuts, guides you to a small viewing platform. From here, the pond reveals itself, more ink than water under the moon. A single ripple, sketching the place where a fish turned over in sleep. A stone pagoda 3 tiers high, maybe 4 stands, half hidden in a stand of sedge. You wouldn't have noticed it without the lantern's small encouragement. That's the point. Nothing here shouts its name. Historians still argue whether samurai gardens tucked political metaphors into their stone's lanterns, placed as subtle emblems, pagodas as coded references, or whether such readings are overgrown vines on plain rocks. You choose the third path, even if metaphors were never planted. The mind finds them anyway. A slender path threads off to one side and ends at a low wicket gate. The host stops short of it, and you do too. This isn't the leaving gate. The thinking gate, the place you face the outside, and then do not take it yet. The lantern near it is darker than the others. Its candle burned low, so the cut stone's silhouette matters more than its light. You sense the room behind you like a warm pocket in a coat you've just taken off. Quirky tidbit. Some roji builders. Angled gates so the moon itself became the transom step. Look up, see a perfect arc where wood would be. On cloudy nights, the design became a joke only the garden got. On nights like this, the sky delivers the punchline gently. The host gestures, you onward, away from the gate and back into the path's soft maze. You pass under a bamboo yatsamgakya fence with a pattern like dice bib sand. The space softens again from edge of world back to someone's pocket universe. Your steps have now learned the lesson. You move like the water in the sukubai, measured and unpretending. Asterix joke to land's featherlight. If city's sidewalks made me walk this carefully, I'd arrive at work enlightened and late at the gardens. Heart, a stone bench sits where camellia has practiced falling with dignity. 2 or 3 whole blossoms lie on the moss, faces up, not scattered, but placed by gravity's particular courtesy. You picture the tea rooms, single camellia, still holding on. You wonder if the garden is where blooms go to audition for tomorrow's alcove. Mainstream fact, camellias are a favorite in tea culture, but come with superstition. Because the whole flower drops at once, some avoided them around ill or high-ranking guests, fearing the omen of a head falling. Others admired that very clean exit as a model of composure. Tea finds a way to make even botany philosophical. The air remembers the brazier's warmth. For you, a ghost heat lingering in your shins while the garden writes cool moonlight on your forearms. The 2 temperatures braid into something your body understands as complete. The iron smell of the kettle has been traded for wet stone, the matsukaze whisper for distant leaves. You realize the ceremony never ended. It just changed instruments. Historians still argue about whether guests conversed in the roji. On departure, or kept the silence unbroken until the street. Period accounts give both murmurs of gratitude under bamboo shadows or wordless bows exchanged by lantern shape. The debate itself feels like a leaf you could let float past. You keep your voice in your pocket and let the path talk for you. At a final turn, the host stops by a squat granite post capped with a shallow dish where rain has gathered. Moonlight parks itself in that water with smug accuracy. The host glances at it, then at you, and you catch the message. There is more to see, hear, than sing. You memorize a reflection you did not expect to need. Quirky tidbit: some tea houses floated a single maple leaf in that rain dish in autumn, or a pinch of snow in winter. Nothing announced, everything implied. Guests who noticed earned nothing but the pleasure of having noticed, which is, in these coordinates, everything. The path returns you toward the entry veranda, past a clump of mondo grass that looks black enough to swallow starlight, past a stone with a chipped corner left facing outward on purpose so your shoe remembers to lift. The lantern near the threshold has burned shorter. Its light rounds the eaves in a soft underline. The Norin moves in the night's smallest wind, as though the house is breathing on your behalf. Joke 3, because the garden writes them. 2. This is the only maze where getting lost would count. As winning, the host turns in the doorway and bows neither the grand formal bow nor the small footnote bow from inside, but a garden bow, relaxed, precise, weather-aware. You answer in the same currency, and the exchange feels like water passing from one bowl to another without spilling. Mainstream fact: the roji stones were often set to match an imagined walking tempo, shorter for elders, steadier for formal processions, variable for 1 or 2 guests at night. Builders anticipated bodies the way hosts anticipate palates. Hospitality got architected into ground. Edo manuals note stone sizes with the same care they give to whisk tines. You step back over the threshold, and the inside light receives you. The tea room now looks like a stage after the play props in their right shadows. Air still warm from lines gone. The scroll keeps its posture. The brazier's coal glows like a single punctuation mark. You know not to read aloud. Everything that fed the night has been paid and put to bed at the edge of the entry. You find your sandals waiting the way you left them, toes pointed out, soles toward the door, a promise kept by a floor. You slip in, the straw stiffed against softened feet. Now the difference between garden stone and street stone becomes a lesson you might actually remember tomorrow. Pace is a choice disguised as a surface. You look once more over your shoulder. The host has not moved. That stillness is both farewell and blessing. The shoji slides. The scene closes to a whisper. The lantern's oval dwindles to a thumbprint of honey in the paper, and then the line is a line again. The garden remains where gardens live bestend the part of your head that smells like pine when nothing is burning. Only then do you realize the path taught you something without insisting. Thresholds work both ways. You came in carrying the city and left carrying the room. You crossed into the garden heavy with tea and returned light with water. The stones arranged your stride. The moss moderated your opinions. The lanterns edited your attention. You got to be a guest of gravity for 15 minutes. And now gravity is reluctant to let you go. You bow once more to the doorway, not to wood, not to paper, but to the people who tuned them in, turn toward the lane, to where Edo waits at the volume you arrived with, or maybe a notch lower. The night doesn't know what you learned. It doesn't need to. Your feet do, and they'll tell the rest. Asterisk, you wait a breath on the threshold until your ears remember how to hear the city again. The lane beyond the Norin is the same narrow ribbon you arrived on, but it feels as if someone turned the texture down a notch, just smooth, corners padded. You step out, the straw of your sandals biting just enough to remind you you're back in shoes and consequences. The lantern outside the tea house lifts a small halo off the damp stone. Its paper face painted, with the house's crest looks warmer now that you've known its interior candle's cousin. The mist has thickened into a friendly veil, catching light and giving it back carefully. Somewhere to your left, a dog coughs twice, fended by a scent only dogs can hold grudges against. Mainstream fact. Edo's nights were regulated by watch systems. Bell towers, Toki no Kane, marked the hours, and neighborhood patrols clicked Haishi clappers as they walked. Curfews existed, in theory. Gates on certain districts closed at set times. And fire brigades, Haishi proud, hypersensitive to any glow that wasn't a lantern where it belonged. The city feared flame more than thieves. After all, thieves stole a night. Fire stole a decade. Your route chooses itself, because the stones have opinions guiding you along a run of low eaves and paper screens, past a shutter with a knothole that seems to watch you with the patience of wood. The kettle's matsukaze still ghosts your ears. In its place, the night hands you substitutes, cartwheels far away, someone ladling water into a bucket, a shamisen practicing 3 notes over and over until they turn into a 4th. Historians still argue whether Edo after dark was truly quiet, outside pleasure quarters, or whether contemporary writers romanticized silence as a moral corrective. Some diaries paint the night like a library. Others admit to late vendors, backroom poetry gatherings. It's in the thrum of the licensed Yoshiwara where time slept days and woke at sundown. Your street tonight belongs to the first school. Hush as civic virtue. You pass a shrine the size of a coat tucked into a gatepost, its fox statue wearing a bib faded to the color of memory. A single stick of incense smolders inside, that faint temple note threading the alley so well you glance around for your kettle hose out of habit. A bamboo dipper rests on the stone basin below it, rim shining where hands have polished it into. An instruction. Quirky tidbit. Some Edo households kept earthquake talismans depicting giant catfish namazu, the mythic culprits of tremors, as if a scolding print on the wall could persuade the underearth to behave. People posted them after big quakes, blaming, bargaining, and joking with geology at the same time. Your sandals find a stretch of wooden walkway. The boards give a respectful creak under your weight, then quiet down as if ashamed of enthusiasm. Across a low fence, a backyard lemon tree has bent 2 fruits into your lane. They glow like moons who miss their stop. A cat perched on the fence regards you with the blank benevolence of small gods and turns away, tail doing calligraphy for Sid. An audience of 1. Joke 1 pads alongside. Congratulations. You have achieved the rare status of politely tolerated by a cat. A watchman rounds the corner, lantern in one hand, Hayoshiji in the other, the clappers kissing 3 times, then resting. He nods. 2 people with flame, each using it correctly. Behind him, a shop hangs its wooden tablet brush characters, promising brush characters ink cellar closed for the night. But a small andin lamp left in the window to declare that the world will resume in the morning. Mainstream fact. Andin lanterns, wood frames, washi panels were the everyday lamps of Edo. Whale oil if you had coin, rapeseed oil if you did not. They were portable rooms of light, their paper softening flame into behavior. Fire codes demanded prudence. Good neighborhoods followed them like prayers. You drift by a row of houses where laundry lines run like faint harp strings, empty now, but still corded with the day's weather. A neighbor has left a pair of waraji drying under the eaves with the soles turned toward the street, ready to meet the outside halfway. The tea house etiquette echoes even on a clothesline, and you let yourself enjoy that symmetry. Historians still argue whether samurai commonly visited chaya tea houses that served food, drink, and social diversions versus the stricter Chishitsu for Chinoyu, and how much the two worlds overlapped. Regulations drew lines. People drew dotted ones. Tonight, your line is solid. Quiet house, quiet lane. Homeward ink. Asterisk. You reach the crossing where a canal sneaks under the street. The water skin holds one lantern reflection hole and breaks another into confetti where a carp chose to be opinionated. A breath of wet cool moves off the surface and lays itself on your wrists, exactly where the brazier left you warm earlier. City as counterpoint. Still composing in your key. Quirky tidbit. Night soil carriers, essential to Edo's famously efficient recycling economy, worked odd hours, ferrying fertilizer out to surrounding fields. Some accounts swear they whistled specific tunes to warn sleepers to move their sandals. Whether melody or myth, the city pulled itself into mourning one ladle at a time. Joke 2 offers a bow. Imagine a city so organized, even compost has office hours. The lane opens onto a wider street where a row of stalls sleeps with their faces on their arms. Behind woven reed blinds, you hear domestic noises turned down, a cough, a yawn, the last chop of a knife on a board. Somewhere, a baby negotiates with the concept of dreams. The bargaining sounds promising. Asterisk. From here, you can see a bell tower. Night's metronome. Its silhouette, a square brushstroke against a lighter patch of cloud. The last hour has just gone. The next sits on the platform's lip, legs swinging, deciding when to drop. You don't need it. Something smaller has taken over your timekeeping. The room's grammar still tapping your wrist. Mainstream fact. Edo's wards, Meiji, were self-policing communities, fire brigades, night watches, and mutual aid systems, nested under shogunate order. Gates closed the streets at night. Keys lived with headmen. Within those borders, people made a culture of caution that still had room for whispers and shamisen. A Kamuso monk passes the kind with a basket hat that turns a head into anonymity and a chest into a flute. He plays a few shakuhachi notes as he walks, the sound like accidental wind finding a bamboo hollow. You don't know if he's begging, meditating, or both. Either way, the song braids neatly with the water's river syllable and your sandal's verse. Historians still argue whether Kamuso and Edo were spiritual wanderers, tolerated spies, or a romantic category invented later and projected backward. Documents disagree. Popular prints add a flute to every mystery until it looks plausible. Your ears vote for present, which is often the truest category available. You cut down a smaller alley because the stones invite you to choose the longer way home. The air here carries a trace of soy and smoke. Restaurant ghosts packing up their opinions. A sliding door somewhere, snicks, shut clean sound, even closure. A moth throws itself against a lantern and realizes, mercifully late, that paper is not flame. Goes away to reconsider literature. Joke 3 gives a sleepy shrug. Relatable, getting very close to a bright idea and then deciding bed is better. You, slow beside a carpentry workshop with a cracked sign that insists it is fine. The yard smells of cypress and glue, even through its sleep. Planes with their mouths covered, chisels aligned like monks, a saw hung by its own respect. You picture the T-bow's foot ring again and realize hands in this city keep teaching each other across trades without a curriculum edge. Grain, breath, pause, patience, finish. Mainstream fact. Edo's Shitamachi crafts woodworkers, dyes, metal workers fed not just the city's needs, but its aesthetics. Taste trickled sideways as much as down. The tea room's restraint colored joinery, joinery's clarity colored tea shelves. Everyone borrowed quietly and gave credit to materials. Your turning toward home makes the smallest, most reasonable of detours. A bridge. Every city promises itself the bridge and night water underneath. The possibility of leaving on top. The kindness of not having to. You stop in the middle because a stop is what bridges are for. If you've learned to disobey haste, a river takes the bell tower shape and edits it into a river's handwriting. It's farther down, two voices negotiate a laugh and succeed. You feel the ceremony slip into the city like ink into water, no cloud, just a tint. The bow you made inside becomes the way you tilt your head when the watchman passes again. The palate reset becomes how you hold your tongue when a cart's wheel splashes near your sandals, and your first instinct is to compose a speech. The careful cleaning becomes the neatness with which you put your thoughts back into their boxes before you let your foot find the next stone. Historians still argue whether Chenwu changed behavior outside the room in any measurable way. Did it make better politics, kinder households, steadier tempers? The answer refuses to be graphed. What you know is small and not negligible. One person walks differently down this street than they did an hour ago. Your neighborhood gate comes into view, a squat guardian, iron-studded, currently yawning. The guard leans in his booth, eyes practicing the art of close while awake. He presses a hand, then thinks better of it. You are walking like someone who won't knock anything over. Apparently, is all the paperwork this hour requires. You turn onto your row. A pair of wind bells from somebody's eaves tries out to notes, finds they like each other, and rests. A neighbor's fish bucket rinsed, leans upside down to dry, catching a coin of moon in its bottom. Your door waits, patient wood, with the same grain it had this morning, and a better audience. You slide it open, hear the track, whisper its opinion of rashness, and step inside. You do not light a lamp immediately. Darkness is not empty after the tea house. It is a room furnished with places to put things you don't need to see. You set your sandals neatly, soles to the door. Your hands remember how to bow, even when they're just folding your outer layer over a peg. The city keeps humming on the far side of your wall. Your wall keeps being a good listener. The kettle in your own corner is cold. You do not ask it to be otherwise. Some silences work best when no hot metal tries to accompany them. Instead, you pour a cup of water from a covered jar, listen to how it sounds on its way into the clay, and decide it will do for now. You lie down with the feeling you learned tonight pressed where your spine meets the mat. The scroll's phrase finds you without paper. Unobstructed path. Not a promise the city can always keep, but a reasonable request to make of your next hour. Your window looks like a shoji in training. The night paints it with a brush made of street. You allow the painting, sign your name on nothing, and let the room cozy. Morning does not rush you. It comes the way steam escapes a kettle left too long off the fire's low. Sure, curling into places you didn't know were waiting. Light slips through the thin paper of the shoji in angled stripes, filtering into your room as if it's checking whether you're ready. You're not, but Edo's mornings don't really take attendance. The first sound is not a rooster or a temple bell, but the hollow dawn of a pestle striking. Rice in a mortar somewhere down the lane. Mochi in the making, probably. The sound comes in pairs with a pause between one strike two shape. 1, 2, check, then repeats until you can almost taste the soft chew and faint sweetness. The city wakes in fragments, and you can build your day from whichever ones you keep. Mainstream fact: Edo's mornings often began well before sunrise, especially in merchant and artisan districts. Craftsmen needed daylight for detail work. Shopkeepers wanted to set up before customers came. Fishmongers raced the tide and the sun. Time was marked less by clock and more by what each neighborhood's first noise happened to be. You rolled to your feet, sandals waiting exactly where you left them, soles toward the door, toes out, because last night's etiquette hasn't worn off yet. The mat underfoot still carries the faint impression of your sleep, a memory that will fade with the day's steps. You slide the shoji open a hand's width, just enough to let in the cool draft carrying the smell of cedar and wet stone. Historians still argue whether Edo mornings smelled different by season or whether diaries exaggerate the shift. Spring was said to carry plum and thatch. Summer, riverweed and sweat. Autumn, smoke and persimmon. Winter, miso soup and the cold metal note of snow. Your nose votes for early spring today. There's something in the air that feels like a blank page. Your streetscape is still open from the watchman's change of shift. Through the gap, you see a vegetable seller balancing two baskets over a pole, the ends swaying like commas in a sentence he's been walking all morning. Okay. Greens, maybe some mushrooms from farther out. His voice doesn't rise so much as ripple, calling out prices and blessings in the same breath. Quirky tidbit in some neighborhoods. Vendors had signature calls melodies, unique enough that residents could identify them before seeing the goods. People joked they could set a clock by the sweet potato seller's song or the tofu peddler's falsetto. If one was late, someone would inevitably go looking to make sure the city's rhythm hadn't skipped a beat. The city now plays a different soundtrack than last night. Its cartwheels grind lightly against wood planks on bridges. A courier jogs past with a bundle tied in indigo cloth, sandals slapping out a quick meter. Somewhere, a dog finally commits to barking, which prompts another dog to offer constructive criticism. Joke one comes in half awake. You know you're home when the neighborhood gossip arrives on four legs. Asterisk, you step outside and head toward the market district, not in haste, but with the kind of purposeful drift that lets you meet the morning halfway. Edo streets in daylight lose some of their mystery, but gain a kind of choreography. Shutters opening in sequence. Brooms drawing parallel lines in dust. Water splashed just far enough to settle the air. Mainstream fact: water sprinkling uchimisu was a common practice not just for cooling the ground and suppressing dust, but also as a gesture of hospitality for passersby. Households might do it twice a day in summer, less often in other seasons, adjusting for weather and foot traffic. At a crossroads, you pause to let a palanquin pass. The curtains are drawn, the occupant invisible, but the bearers exchange nods with you as if to say, you've both agreed this street belongs to more than one kind of traveler. Behind them, a boy in an oversized apron runs to keep up, balancing a tray of tea bowls that clink like polite wind chimes. Asterisk. Historians still argue whether everyday Edo residents drank tea habitually outside of formal settings, or whether tea remained a luxury for specific occasions. Excavations of commoner districts show plenty of humble tea bowls, suggesting the drink's reach was broader than some records claim. This morning, you side with the evidence you can sip. You make a small detour toward a riverside bridge drawn by the smell of grilling. Sure enough, a vendor is set up with skewers of river fish, the skin blistered and just beginning to curl. The smoke is clear, thin enough to paint without dripping. He turns one skewer and nods to you in that way. Edo vendors have half acknowledgement, half sales pitch without words. Quirky tidbit: some Edo grillers used rice bran smoke to give fish a sweeter, subtler edge. Others swore by pine twigs for a sharper bite. The debate occasionally escalated into friendly rivalries, with customers swearing allegiance to one smoke over another, as if they were sumo wrestlers. Joke to stretches like the river, only here. Could dinner politics start with which twig did you burn? From the bridge, you can see boats setting out, some for fishing, some for ferrying, one clearly overloaded with barrels that slosh in protest. The ferryman's hat tilts against the low sun, his pole pushing off in slow authority. The water has turned from last night's ink to a reflective scroll, each ripple a brushstroke that refuses to keep still. Mainstream fact: Edo's waterways were both streets and larder's routes for goods, shortcuts for travel, and sources of daily meals. Canals and rivers gave the city its layered geography, each band with its own economy and gossip. On your way back toward home, you pass a line of shops just opening, A woodblock print seller. Props, fresh sheets in the window actors' faces. Sumo champions. Landscapes with Mount Fuji in varying moods. The colors are sharp. The lines so fine they almost hum. One print shows a tea house garden. Lantern light against moss. You feel your steps slow without your permission. Historians still argue whether such prints captured specific tea houses or composite ideals designed to flatter buyers' memories. Either way, you recognize the curve of a stepping stone, the angle of a gate, and the way the lantern's shadow falls like a closing fan. You reach your own doorway again, sunlight now replacing the lantern's memory from last night. Inside, the air feels cooler, slower, as if it knows you've been out among faster things. The kettle sits where you left it, still cold, still unbothered. You decide to leave it that way. Some mornings are better met with water as it is unboiled. K1 TRANSFORMED. Joke. 3 takes a sip and nods. Sometimes the most complicated flavor is nothing happened yet. You settle by the window, cup in hand, and watch as the lane edits itself for the day. Shadows shrinking, sounds growing sharper, the smell of rice softening into background. Last night's tea path and this morning's market share. The same stones, but they teach different lessons. One is about slowing until the world has to catch you. The other is about letting the world's momentum carry you without spilling. Mainstream fact: Edo life balance ceremony and commerce, not by separating them, but by letting them overlap at human scale markets near shrines. Tea rooms near gardens, gardens near streets. The city made room for pauses without pretending pauses were permanent. You lean against the frame and feel the warmth creeping in. Somewhere down the lane, the vegetable seller's call fades, replaced by the brush rhythm of a broom against stone. The day has started. You don't have to, not yet. Asterisk sleep tugs at the edge of your awareness, but Edo still has one more curtain to pull aside before it lets you go. You wake in the soft gray before dawn, not from noise, but from the feeling that the air is a fraction lighter than it was. Somewhere, a rooster has been prematurely ambitious, but the city's main chorus hasn't begun. You roll from the mat, as if not to wake the walls. The house holds the night's cool like a careful secret. You slide the door open to the lane. The mist has diluted into a faint blue suggestion, the kind that hides nothing, yet still refuses to hurry. The stones feel different underfoot now, drier, with a warmth so faint it might just be memory rehearsing for later. Mainstream fact: Edo mornings began early laborers rising with the first bell, merchants with the second, and samurai according to their lord's schedule. Vendors prepared their goods before the sun cleared the tiled rooftops, and the smell of rice steaming or miso soup brewing crept into the lanes before the official day started. You followed the same path you took home, though it now speaks a different dialect. The shrine's fox still wears its bib, but the incense has burned away, leaving only the faintest ash scent. The stone basin wears a skin of dew. The dipper's handle is cool and faintly slick. A sparrow sits on the roof's edge, blinking slowly as if evaluating your early appearance. Historians still argue whether tea gatherings in the early hours or more a luxury of high-ranking samurai or an occasional indulgence for merchants with unusual schedules. Diaries describe both, but records leave wide gaps. What's certain is that the quiet before commerce lent itself well to the tea-mind, fewer interruptions, fewer reasons to check over your shoulder. You pass the carpentry shop, its door open to the smell of fresh shavings. Inside, a man squats over a beam, pulling a plane toward him with the steadiness of someone who hasn't had time yet to ruin the day. The curls of cypress fall into a tidy drift, like small paragraphs. He doesn't glance up, but his pace acknowledges yours, a nod without eye contact. Quirky tidbit: Edo craftsmen sometimes timed their work to neighborhood rhythms, pausing, planning, or hammering when a storyteller was performing nearby. Their noise wouldn't compete. It wasn't written law, just good manners that became habit. The wide street you crossed last night is stirring now. A vegetable seller trundles a cart with baskets of greens, still dewy from the field. The tops of daikon peek like shy ghosts from their straw mat covering. A fishmonger arranges his tubs, so the morning light catches scales just enough to make them seem alive in still water. The clink of a scale weight meeting brass echoes more than it should in the cool air. Joke 1 stretches his legs. In this city, even a radish gets a better morning introduction than most people you know. The bell tower rings, its tone more insistent than last night's languid pace. Pigeons scatter, rearrange themselves to roofs over, and pretend they had planned to do that anyway. A shopkeeper sweeps his storefront with such concentration that the street seems to move around him rather than the other way. His broom's rasp on a stone feels like punctuation between scenes. Mainstream fact: morning markets Asaichi were a fixture of Edo life, supplying fresh produce, fish, and other perishables. They were not just economic exchanges, but social ones, where gossip traveled alongside radishes, and alliances both business and personal were refreshed daily. You edge past a line at a miso shop, the scent so warm and savory it makes you think of the tea house's brazier. A woman emerges with a wooden tub bound by a rope handle. Her smile aimed at nothing in particular, which makes it feel more permanent. Historians still argue whether the rise of merchant culture in late Edo truly softened samurai austerity, or whether each group simply borrowed from the other when it was convenient. The tea ceremony's appeal across classes suggests some value slowness, exactness, courtesy translated without too much loss. Turning toward the smaller alley you favor, you notice laundry already hanging, a ribbon of pale fabric catching the breeze like a quiet flag. Beneath it, a cat maybe last night sits on the fence again, eyes half-lidded. If you didn't know better, you'd think it's been guarding your shortcut. Quirky tidbit: Edo cats were often considered working animals for pest control, yet woodblock prints also show them as companions with named collars and elaborate bedding. Few tea practitioners even claimed a resident cat improved gardens. Balance, though whether aesthetically or redentially, is unclear. Joke 2 ambles in. If the tea house had a cat, it would probably bow better than most guess. The lane narrows until the walls almost meet above your head. Here, the damp lingers longer, moss holding on in vertical gardens between tiles. You spot a rain chain, a line of copper cups strung from eave to barrel, still wet from last night's drizzle. It's a small performance. It's water traveling in public. Mainstream fact: rain chains, kusari, were both decorative and functional, guiding runoff from roof to ground in a controlled way. Some tea houses use them to lead guests' eyes from sky to earth, reinforcing the ceremony's themes without a single spoken word. Asterisk, your feet slow before you tell them to. Cat. The tea house sits as if it has been waiting, not with the urgency of an appointment, but with the patience of something that knows it will outlast both of you. Norin hangs still, no lantern lit, the paper of the shoji opaque in morning's flat light. You can almost feel the faint warmth of the brazier inside, smell of roasted rice, the hum of the kerosene, preserved like a pressed leaf. Historians still argue whether returning to a tea house uninvited the next day was acceptable etiquette or a breach of the host-guest contract. Some say it was a friendly gesture. Others insist the ceremony was meant to be an island, complete and self-contained. You don't knock, you don't need to. The door stays closed, the house intact in its silence. You bow toward it, not a full, formal bend, just the kind you'd give a familiar teacher when passing in the street. The bow is mostly for you anyway, a way to underline the night in your memory. Joke 3 lifts the corner of its mouth. One visit and you're already the neighbor who just happened to be passing by. Asterisk, The walk back to your own doorway is short now, yet it feels like it belongs to a larger map. The path, the gate, the street sounds. The sense they've been threaded together by last night's tea into a pattern you hadn't noticed before. You step inside, and the house accepts you without commentary. The mat under your feet feels subtly different. But it hasn't changed, only you have. The scroll on your wall says something entirely ordinary, but you read it slower, as though expecting it to offer a cup. You let it remain silent. You lie down again, not to undo the waking, but to see if the quiet can stitch itself across this morning too. The city is waking fully now. Clatter, call, splash, chatter. Your wall holds the sounds at a polite arm's length. Somewhere out there, another kettle is beginning its own masakaze, and you find yourself smiling at the thought without needing to be invited. You lie back down, and the ceiling looks less like a ceiling and more like a very quiet page. The house hasn't changed since last night, yet everything in it behaves differently. As if the tea room has sent a memo to your walls. Keep it down. We are practicing precision. The pillow smells faintly of sun-warmed cotton. Your breath drafts cool past your throat and returns warmer. Trained by a kettle you can't see, you sit up and slide the door open halfway, letting the lane's morning find you without barging in. It arrives in pieces, a single broom bristling. Stone, a dash of miso steam fleeing a neighbor's lid, the hollow toke of a bucket set down 2 doors away. The sounds arrange themselves like utensils on a tatami scene, generous with space. You realize you're listening for the kettle's matsukasian noises that aren't kettles. And you still keep hearing it? On your shelf sits a plain clay cup. Not a bowl with a biography, just a vessel that does its job. You rinse it, not ceremonial, no fukusa, no choreography, just with attention. The well water you pour into a pot sounds polite on the way in. You bring it to a near boil and ease it off, letting the breath drop from urgent to friendly. Don't have matcha. You do have roasted barley. You watch its color seep, a quiet amber, and decide that for this hour, barley is green enough in spirit. Mainstream fact. Edo households commonly drank roasted barley tea mujika in warm seasons. And roasted rice tea genmika spread from humble kitchens to refined tastes. Tea in the capital was plural green for ceremony, roasted and rougher for thirst in mornings. You're not breaking any oath by swapping leaves for grains. You're joining a larger table. You carry the cup to the doorway and sit. The floorboard under you keeps the same secret creak it's kept since forever. You forgive it. You set the cup down on your folded acacia paper coaster of habitant. Notice how the steam drifts toward the opening like a small envoy. You don't bow to it, but your shoulders do something that looks like thanks. Historians still argue whether Chinoyu's discipline actually migrated into daily manners. An hour of codified grace softened how people handled chopsticks. Arguments in doorways, or whether tea lived in a special box labeled exceptions. Diaries hint both ways. A lord praised for speaking like a bowl placed gently. A clerk mocked for pouring rank like water slopped from a kettle. You vote with your morning. Some boxes have leaky bottoms on purpose. Your cat appears on the sill, performs an inspection that would intimidate a magistrate, and sits with a sigh big enough for 2. Its tail writes a line in the dust and stops right on the punctuation. Joke 1 shows up with it. Congratulations, you've been approved by a Department of Household Serenity that never accepts bribes. The cat blinks, agrees to nothing, and doubles down on existing. You look around for a scroll you don't own, and instead choose a phrase to hang in air. Muge no michi, unobstructed path. The path today is only from cup to lip to chest, but scale as a trick small roads still go places. You slide your sandals to the edge of the threshold, toes out, like last night taught you. Leaving is always easier if you've rehearsed departure. Quirky tidbit. Some Edo folks pinned tiny paper charms inside door lintels, naming virtues they wanted to trip over on the way out: patience, steady hand, quiet mouth. Others hung wind bells fearing, not just for summer breeze, but to comb the air. A sound fence that mosquitoes and hot tempers disliked equally. Your neighbor's peer tries the scale and decides 2 notes are enough for now. You sip the tea. Tastes like grain in rain rumors. The cup warms your fingers. Your fingers teach the rest of you. The street's rhythm accelerates a notch. The fishmonger's cart claims its lane. A storyteller clears his throat in a courtyard. Children invent a rule for a game and change it instantly because that's what rules are for. You hear the city as if it learned to whisper in the night and hasn't remembered how to shout yet. Mainstream fact: Edo authorities issued repeated fire and noise ordinances curbing drumming after hours, controlling lantern use, directing where and when stalls could open, attempting to tune the city's daily hum. Compliance varied by ward and weather. Custom did as much as law. Your lane feels like one of the places where custom won. You set the cup down and let your gaze find the most ordinary thing in the room: the joint between 2 boards in your floor. A scene you've ignored for years. It suddenly looks like it's a tatami line that expects you to align something to a torn cup. Your thoughts, your morning. You slide the cup so its base edge parallels the seam. Nothing dramatic happens, or perhaps something did, and vowed to keep quiet about it. Joke to unfurls. Delicately, if minimalism were a sport, you'd meddle in moving a cup half an inch and feeling it. Your smile is small because the hour prefers small. Your hands, idle and obedient, fold the case you once around nothing, then unfold it. The paper carries a ghost of sweetness from last night's sweets and a hint of barley from this morning's. Cup notes written on fibers that will outlast your memory by a week. You tuck it away. Souvenirs are better when they don't shout souvenir. A neighbor knocks once on another neighbor's gate, then twice, then decides to come back later. A messenger jogs past with a wooden tablet bound in cord, knocks his hip, saying hurry, but not foolishly. You watch the morning fill its bowl with people and think, the tea lesson wasn't just stillness, it was allocation: heat here, cool there, sound over this seam, silence over that one. You don't need an alcove to curate your day. You only need to place things where they can breathe. Historians still argue whether the tea house was a refuge from politics or a venue for it disguised as moss. Negotiations happened, their alliances sketched in steam, but many hosts insisted the room stood higher than agendas. A discipline that tempered the hard edge of rank. Records are slippery. Results are local. Your proof is immediate. A city that was noisy now has treble and bass. You can distinguish. You rinse the cup. Not because it's dirty, but because ending well is a kind of cleaning. Water in, water out. A little circle drawn on a morning that wasn't asking for geometry, but looks better wearing it. You set the cup upside down to dry, a tiny pagoda with no sermons. The cat approves by becoming a loaf. Choke 3 curls beside the loaf. You've achieved the highest rank in the household. Chief officer of doing things softly. You tie your sash, smooth sleeves, and step into your sandals. The threshold recognizes you, or maybe you recognize it. The lane accepts your feet as if you learned the choreography while you were asleep. You move towards your day with the pace the stones asked of you last night, and the scroll's voice stuck to your ribs. Someone will jostle you before noon. A plan will change shape. A cart will splash. A letter will arrive with opinions. Still, under it, the kettle you don't own keeps whispering pines. Mainstream fact to carry like a folded slip. The Edo you walk through will one day burn. Its flood, rebuild, rename itself, and keep its appetite for order with room for festivals. The tea houses will contract and expand. Lineages will disagree and bow, and wind and pines will go on finding kettles. Continuity is often just attention, surviving embarrassment. You take the long way because thresholds have been generous lately and deserve reciprocation. Your stride has learned to leave room between steps for a city's heartbeat to be heard. The path is unobstructed enough for one more hour to go. Asterisk, let the street's edges soften the way fog softens the lanterns. Ink, you walk slower now, as if the ground has politely asked you not to rush, and you've agreed because you remember what it feels like to be a guest in your own morning. The cup is clean and drying. The cat is becoming a warm punctuation mark, and the kettle that teas and hums in the background, a memory that behaves like music. Set the day's list down beside you. It will not vanish. It will simply fade to a comfortable distance, like a bell you can hear without watching. Let your shoulders drop a small bow to no one in particular. The room knows what to do with that bow. It stores it in the floorboards, the way tatami store the shape of knees, and then forget it kindly. Breathe in through the door crack and call it garden, even if it's just alley air. Breathe out across the rim of a cup, even an empty one, and call it pine, even if it's only steam you imagine. Somewhere, water is warming for someone else. You are allowed to borrow that warmth in your mind. The body understands the loan and pays it back by unclenching. Let the sounds separate. A broom for the sidewalk, a cart for the market, a voice for a greeting that doesn't require a reply. Between them is the quiet you brought home, the space you made in your pocket without knowing, now opened like a paper fan. It will close later on its own. You don't have to hold it open. Just let it shape the door between thought and step. When you're ready, lie back. Let the mat hold the parts of you that insist on holding everything else. Close your eyes last, after the room has already dimmed on its own. The path remains unobstructed for sleep, too short, direct, lined with small, forgiving stones. The kettle's whisper thins to a thread, then to a suggestion, then to nothing you need to name.